Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, I will be reviewing the new M. Night Shyamalan film, Trap, just coming to theaters today. It'll be a spoiler-free, very short spoiler-free review. Then I'll have a conversation with my sister, which I've pre-recorded, walking through his entire filmography, almost his entire filmography, the important films after The Sixth Sense and beyond, minus his first two early attempts. And then wrapping up the episode with a spoiler-filled walkthrough of the plot with my thoughts about this interesting, very interesting film. Like it or not, it's definitely something worth discussing. Before then, a few calls to action. Haven't mentioned this on the podcast in some time. If you'd like to support the show, please do recommend this to your friends and family. If they're seeing these films or watching these shows, or you're watching it with them, and you think they might enjoy the conversation. Follow me on Letterboxd. I will have mini reviews and a full ranking of the M. Night Shyamalan films. Check the show note for my Letterboxd profile link. And next week I will be on vacation, but Sunday is the finale of Game of Thrones. And I will be giving you my review of this season once we've seen the ending. I think this season, the quality of this season really depends on how well they nail the landing. But I will be on vacation, so will it be a short episode? Maybe I'll have a few short episodes, recording from the car once again, like I did earlier during my last vacation. I have yet to figure that out. I'll probably also throw in an episode there where I have things you may want to watch in the next week or two, some reviews of series that I started watching that I gave up on for multiple different reasons, but that you may appreciate more than me. So I'll make those recommendations in a separate episode, as well as some movies that are coming to streaming that you may want to catch up on. And once I return from vacation and House of the Dragon has wrapped up, HBO's coming back with Industry, a third season of Industry. That's definitely something everybody can catch up on now if you have Max, and something I'll definitely be covering here in the show. Okay, so Trap. M. Night Shyamalan has had a resurgence in the past few years. His career hit a real tough spot, working within studio systems, making very expensive films that weren't very financially successful, and then made a huge pivot, and I'm going to cover all of this in much more detail when we get to my conversation with my sister, in starting to fund his own films. And to a large extent, it gives him a lot of freedom to make the kind of film that he maybe would hesitate to make. There's pluses and minuses here, basically. He can take more risks, but maybe there's less scrutiny in what he's trying to create, which then makes me curious about him as a filmmaker. He's one of the more interesting filmmakers working now, in that he not only writes and directs these films, but unlike a Tarantino that needs hundreds of millions of dollars to make and promote his films, he works on much tighter budgets, which gives him a huge amount of control to be the producer. He really just makes the films he wants to make, and sometimes he makes them because he thinks he's going to make some cash, and sometimes he makes them because it's something very personal to him. So all of this is to say, he is good and bad in most of his films, in my opinion, not successful, but always interesting. And you really are seeing somebody who has full control of their career, such a rare thing, and what he chooses to do with it. What he's chosen to do with the movie Trap is to put his daughter front and center as a Taylor Swift-like, well, not musical style-wise, but theoretically a huge pop star. She is actually a singer. She's trying to get her singing career off the ground. And in so many ways, this film is almost unreviewable. Or I should say that it's which version of this movie you choose to review. Because this film is multiple films at the same time, and some of them are far more successful than others. And the one most negative thing that it truly is an incredible vanity project. There's been so much talk about Nepo babies in the culture in the past few years. And M. Night is one of those filmmakers like Tarantino and some others where you have to talk about them in the context of talking about their movies. It's inescapable. And in this particular year, he has now had a film he's produced, directed by one of his daughters, and then his own directorial effort this year, starring his daughter. And I really do mean that. She is playing this character, Lady Raven, who's performing on stage. Throughout a large portion of this film, we hear at least 10 different songs, and almost the totality of those songs. We see her dancing, and then, amazingly, she becomes part of the story of the film. Minor spoiler there. but it is pretty incredible when that turn comes in the plot. As that plot itself, let me just tell you the experience of I try to avoid watching trailers, and then I saw the teaser for Trap. I try to avoid trailers in the movie theater, first of all. Try to get there late enough to avoid it. When I saw Longlegs, I saw so many trailers for horror movies. I decided to do an episode about it because about these upcoming horror films. It's included in the Longlegs review, if you haven't heard that already, in our catalog. Because in general, I try to avoid trailers. I don't want to be spoiled. So when I saw the teaser for the film initially, I felt like they shouldn't have given away the setup for the film. And I'm going to do that here, even though I disagree with it, because it's such a minor spoiler in the context of the film. In that initial trailer, we see that Josh Hartnett is speaking to one of the workers at this concert and says, "Hey, why is there so much security here today?" To which he discovers that this is actually a trap. This is a trap to capture this serial killer called the Butcher, who has killed about a dozen people in this Philadelphia area. Once again, almost all, if not all, of Shyamalan's films have a Philadelphia connection. And I felt like, are they telling me too much? Is this a reveal? And actually, in watching the film, it actually is a reveal, although it comes only 15 minutes in. So I don't really feel bad about spoiling that. First of all, it's already been spoiled in the trailer. Second of all, it's very early in the going. What I would say is if you have not seen the most recent full trailer of this film, absolutely do not watch it. There are literally scenes in the trailer that occur in the very, very final moments of this film. And I anticipated throughout watching this film a change of venue, let's just say, because of the trailer. And I would not have had that anticipation if I had not seen it. So if you haven't seen the trailer, the full trailer, I've only seen that teaser, then the teaser spoils very little. The trailer spoils a lot. So don't watch the full trailer. And if you have seen the trailer, even the teaser, you get a feel for this. This is a trap. He's been trapped inside of this arena. They knew he was going to be here. That gets explained later in the film. So in my conversation with my sister later, you're going to see us asking that question, like, how would they even be able to do this? It is explained thoroughly by the end of the film, but that's the setup. And I can already hear the memes, or they probably exist already. I should track them down. But this is how all the fathers in America felt taking their daughters to the era tours. They felt trapped. Now, if you do make this read, if you do want to make that read of this film, this could be something a little transgressive or maybe a little too honest, because the performer on stage that theoretically is driving this father to desperately need to escape at all costs without upsetting his daughter too much would be M. Night's daughter herself. So this is like M. Night saying, if I got to listen to her, you guys got to listen to her too. I'm inflicting this on the rest of the population. I mean that as a joke, by the way, because she has a totally fine and nice voice. The production here is actually on some of these songs is actually pretty good. I assume they got famous producers to do some of this productions. As a matter of fact, Kid Cudi has a very funny cameo here in the film as one of her collaborators. I thought it was funny. I know people are already reacting negatively to it. And even as a performer, she needs to actually perform a few scenes with some of these much more experienced actors, and she's totally fine. Would I have centered my daughter this way in a film? I mean, maybe she wanted to do this. I hope so, because it is a strange dynamic to build the whole movie around your daughter, but she does not humiliate herself, and it surprisingly doesn't distract, or I should say distracts incredibly early on in the film. But somehow by the end, it just all becomes part of this really convoluted, surprisingly, considering how simple this premise is, how convoluted the plot is, which is kind of why this film is one that you can't even quite review. Because yes, it's a mess. Yes, it's a vanity project. Yes, it is literally just asking you as you're watching it to be like, well, what could they possibly do with this premise? And how's he possibly going to get out of the situation? And that is part of the game that is being played. So in that way, it is, as a very trashy and inconsequential thriller, it's actually fun. Is it scary? Not really. Is there a mystery that is compelling. There is maybe the frustration in all of this. There are parts of the film that hint at maybe a really good film. This is my criticism once again. You'll hear it when I'm reviewing Old later in this whole career retrospective section of this episode. But there is, even in a movie as dumb as Old ends up being, there are moments in that script that you can see a much better film built out of. And there are moments here where you could have an actual, really earnest and serious exploration of some of the topics that are here. Because this film, like most of his films, have ideas in them, but then the experience of watching it is just one contrivance after another that either does pay off or does not, and sometimes raises more questions than it answers, and other times, and for the most part here, I would say, for the most part, it plays fair, as silly as some of the things that play out here are, that even when you scratch your head about them, the script is tight enough to wrap those things up by the end. And yeah, if you've seen the trailer, you have already seen a lot of the structure of at least the first half of this film. I won't talk about the second half until spoilers, but I once again will be critical of the trailer itself in that a lot of the situations he has to try to get himself out of, and he proves himself out to be very proficient, although these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of security guards and police officers have to be absolutely dumb and doing absolutely the wrong thing for him to be or appear as smart as he does, although he is doing clever things. It's just that no one ever questions anything. No one's ever doing the follow-up that they need to do to prevent him from even being able to make it through the first half of the film. And the last thing I'll mention is the main performances. Josh Hartnett, who's having a bit of a comeback between his memorable episode of Black Mirror last year, and then, of course, Oppenheimer, and now this. So big comeback for him. And he's good. There are choices that aren't necessarily his. They could be requested of him, in which he has to do this like creepy smile. You've seen it in the trailer, the like dead-eyed smile where he is freaking out and playing the doting dad at the same time. And it's effective, and yet it is just the same note hit over and over and over again. But what I'll mention is that later on, when some of the thematics of the film, not very well explored, but still raised at least, he shows a lot more. And once again, hints at a much stronger version of this film. And I was actually going to compliment another performance, but I'm going to leave it for the spoilers because it would be a spoiler. So I'll just keep it there. There are other performances here that don't really hit until later in the film, let's say, that you may feel that maybe this role, if it's so slight, has been overcast, and then it pays off in the end. I'm sorry that's so vague, but it's spoilers, so I'm going to try to avoid it. All right, so my final verdict is this was fun. This is a dumb movie. This has terrible things about it. Primarily, I would have cut a lot of the footage of the performer. I understand he's trying to showcase his daughter, but if he had hired an actual famous singer to be the star of this film, you would have judiciously cut around the performance. You would have cut back in, you would have dipped out. You would not have just had a scene in which a whole entire song or multiple songs are playing out in totality. That obviously is this dad, this doting dad, Shyamalan himself. And thematics we'll talk about a darker read of this whole thing, biographical one, autobiographical one, when we get into spoilers, in trying to give his daughter this launchpad for her potential career. But the fact that it is so central to the beginning of the film is an obvious, it makes it feel like an obvious vanity project. So that's weird. And the plot contrivances require a lot of suspension of disbelief or just accepting the fact that every law enforcement member in this entire film is really bad at their job. But it just makes it fun to watch for me. I think mileage may vary on this. If you are not a fan of his sillier films, you may want to wait until this is available on streaming, which will probably be a month from now, for rental anyway. And if you want to go see this with your kids, it has this really brutal central serial killer character, but yet, and this is a critique I'd make of the film, it pulls so many punches in not having an edge of brutality to it that it simultaneously lessens the impact of the film, but it would make it something you could see with your teenage kids. This is very teen horror. It's avoids horror almost completely. It is mostly a thriller and oftentimes very funny. So it's the type of thing that is just a fun movie-going experience. But it could have been more. And so take that review, a very middling review, and depending on your expectations, proceed accordingly. Okay, we'll have the spoilers. Jump to the end of the episode if you want to hear those. But do stick around for my conversation with my sister where we break down his filmography. And I'll even have some additional commentary at the very end, correlating this film thematically and just correlating some of the elements of this film and the experience of watching it with this review of his career. All right, Celia. So to the audience out there, I will be reviewing Trap in this episode, but we're recording this before we've seen Trap, so we don't know if it's going to be good or bad. My general opinion of M. Night's filmography, we're going to be walking through all of it here. I've seen all of his films. I've done my homework. I've caught up on every single one of them. There was 2 that I was missing. I've seen both of them. And maybe we could just give our general opinions of each one of these. Celia, as a preface to this, I'm going to actually have his biography and some of the behind the scenes behind some of these films, which maybe I'll touch on a little bit in our conversation. But a lot of these films have very interesting backstories, especially some of the earlier ones. He's had quite an interesting career, and it's very variable, the quality of his films. So I kind of hope, and I want to get your opinion on what you're hoping to get from Trap. I don't even think he's going to make a classic film anymore, like The Sixth Sense or something, but something like Split, where the acting is really good, the suspense is good, the actors are taking it seriously, but the movie's pretty goofy and having fun, right? That's one option. Or if it's not that, I don't want it to be like, okay, I want it to be an absolute train wreck. That's one of those 2 things. That's what I'm hoping for here.
A train wreck would be very entertaining because some of these movies that he's made, and I've said this before about him, are not very good, but they are extremely entertaining. That's the vibe I might be getting from this entire plot that he has in Trap, which I'm going to go see on Saturday with Andrew. So I'm excited for that. I don't know if I see this being a serious movie.
The concept is pretty ridiculous on its face, right? That
yes,
I mean, I guess we'll have to see.
What I mean.
We'll have to see what the explanation for this is. But the idea that we've entrapped somebody here, we gave away these free tickets, we've gotten somebody here who is the serial killer. Maybe there's an explanation, but like how you would know enough to lure the serial killer, but not knowing who that person is pretty preposterous. And weeding them out, right? Like it is going to be very funny. But I guess that's the film, right? That's what the film's going to be.
How is he weeding them out? I don't know the answers to this stuff. And the thing is, I didn't even think that hard about it because he's so whimsical in his ideas that I didn't think to be very logical about what would be happening in this movie. I just am very interested to see how he's going to play this out.
To your point, I'm a little skeptical that this is going to pay off because when they interviewed him recently and they said, what was the genesis point for this film? His daughter is the pop star who's performing. And he said it was, I wanted a movie where she would be singing the whole time to expose her singing abilities. And then he developed the movie around that. So I'm like, okay, I'm not sure this is really going to work. But hey,
I'm hoping he might be able to make a dark comedy out of this.
Yes. And by the way, his films oftentimes are comedic. And I think people miss that a little bit. So, okay. He makes a movie in 1992, right when he graduated from NYU, called Praying with Anger. I've never seen this film, but it was pretty well respected. Mostly what people say is that it was well made. And pretty impressive that he makes a feature-length film coming out of NYU as his graduate thesis, basically. It takes him 6 years to get a film off the ground. This one's called Wide Awake. I've never seen this film, by the way. This did get a theatrical release. It stars Rosie O'Donnell and Dana Delaney. Dennis Leary's in it. There's Robert Loggia. It has Hollywood stars. It came out through Miramax. It's about a boy in Catholic school. By the way, he was born in India, but moved when he was a baby. He grew up outside of Philadelphia, which is, of course, where all his movies are set. And He did go to a Catholic school. So these themes of exploring faith, obviously, especially early in his films, and of course, being an outsider, although this is about a white kid in a Catholic school. So it's really not that close to him, I don't think, although it was actually shot in the school he went to. I've never seen this film, and I heard it's not very good. I think it's earnest, but not great. Have you ever seen this, Wide Awake?
I think I've seen something else called Wide Awake. I don't think it
Not
was
this
the
one.
movie you
Not the
just
Rosie O'Donnell
described.
nun movie. No.
No.
This was a flop. It cost $6 million and made nothing. But once again, it's like one of those middling, it wasn't expected to be a blockbuster. This is 6 years for him to get this movie off the ground. He has made money, by the way, along the way by writing spec scripts. And he was pretty well known for polishing movies. His culminating year for him is 1999, where not only does The Sixth Sense come out, but also he wrote the script for Stuart Little, the animated movie, which was a big hit this same year. And another film that he ghost wrote. His name is not on the credits, but he's the one who actually wrote She's All That. So 1999 was a big year for M. Night Shyamalan.
That was pretty good.
I mean, it's a cult classic at this point. I never thought it was very good, but it did make a lot of money. That's for sure.
It was cute, though.
Most importantly, of course, is that he makes The Sixth Sense. This movie, by the way, he desperately wanted to direct again. He was so frustrated with his career. He said, I'm going to write a script. It's like maybe this is what leads to some of the mistakes he makes later on in believing in his skills too much. He sat down and said, I'm going to write a script that's undeniable. Someone's going to have to buy it. And then I'm going to use that script to force them to allow me to direct. And that's exactly what he did. He wrote The Sixth Sense, which of course was a script that was undeniable. He said, I will sell this script. It went up for $3 million, was sold to Disney for $3 million, the highest anyone ever paid for a spec script. And he said, but only if I get to direct. So it worked. They bought it. But this was considered such a horrible idea that the head of production was fired for this very deal. Of course, he had the last laugh. And more importantly than that, Disney had such little faith in this movie, especially with him directing, untested director, that they sold the film off to Spyglass, only keeping 12% of the profits. So they basically got rid of it. They dumped it. Big mistake for them because the movie made a huge amount of money. And even getting Bruce Willis involved, all of this is to say that all these films, even getting made, are one accident after another. Bruce Willis had sued Disney for a deal for a movie that fell through. He was having a very rough patch in his career at that moment. To his credit, he saw the script and he loved the script. He did not want M. Night directing it because this guy had no, street cred at all. But after he met with him, he says, I have faith in this kid. I'll work with him. And they had a really successful relationship. And of course, the movie is a massive success. Just to put it in context before we give our opinions on the film, it was produced for $40 million. It made $673 million. It was the second highest grossing movie of the year. In today money, that would be way over $1 billion when you adjust for inflation. That this movie came out of absolutely nowhere, got dumped in August, this very weekend, by the way, back in 1999, 25 years ago, the same weekend that Trap is opening. But movies that open in August are not expected to be blockbusters. The end of the summer, you want to get the last people before they go back to school. And this thing, of course, was number one for 8 weeks in a row. It was a massive success. No one could have expected it. And it's a really important film because I feel the way people write scripts, this is extremely rare, the way people write scripts changed after this movie came out. And Fight Club as well, and The Matrix, all 1999 movies, by the way. Matrix and Fight Club and The Sixth Sense. But Sixth Sense is the most successful of those three, probably. But it was, from that point on, people could never just tell a straightforward crime story anymore or horror story or whatever. There always had to be some little twist. Even if you're making a drama, you couldn't just make a straightforward drama. Everybody needed to have a little twist. And that became a problem, honestly, with screenwriting from this point on. There was like a lot of gimmicky movies, but it also made, I think, screenplays a lot more interesting. Like you really needed to have some kind of reveal in the third act across the board. And that all comes from this movie because it was so huge.
And books also are
everything, right? Exactly. Storytelling in general. There was just an expectation now that if you just say, then this happens and this happens at the end, people are like, the end, there's always an expectation now from this moment on that there's going to be something that happens in the third act. It doesn't have to be a huge reveal. It could just be a small reveal, but there's always got to be some, how do they know each other? Oh, they did know each other before. There's got to be something, even in the drama. So just an expectation now. And this movie really created that.
That's what I was going to say about this movie. This is before all of this was happening that you were just talking about. So when it turns out at the end, I don't even want to spoil it for someone who hasn't seen it.
It's 25 years
it's
ago.
so
There are a lot of
good,
young people
though.
who have not yet seen it. So I think most people know this, but yeah, we don't have to spoil any of these movies by it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you haven't seen it, you should see it because it wasn't something that was happening up until this point, really, at least
Right.
not in with this kind of impact, that I was blown away. And now, because it has become the norm or expected, it's almost like we need this extra adrenaline rush now when we watch our movies. So if there isn't some kind of a unknown fact in there, especially towards the third act or at the very end, it becomes disappointing.
Right.
Because when I saw this movie and the reveal comes, I was blown away. And people are watching it just to see this. Like, oh, you have to see this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's amazing. You'll never believe it. So I really liked it. I loved it even. To this day, I still love it. And it's a type of movie where you're going to watch it a few times, especially now that you know.
Right. I saw this in theaters when it came out. Speaking of 1999 being such an influential year, an important year that changed so many aspects of filmmaking. The Matrix, obviously, I just mentioned before, but 1999 is a truly exceptional year for filmmaking. There's so many talented Mr. Ripley, which we just discussed a few months ago here on the podcast.
Oh, I love that movie.
But Fight Club, of course, a perennial classic, which also has a big twist in that movie.
4 times in the movie theater, could not stop going. I could not stop.
But it's just, and of course, The Matrix, another hugely influential film. So just really incredibly huge films all happening in 1999. This is maybe one of the absolute most important. I remember seeing it in the theater. It was 1 week after, of course, that's what I was going to say. 1 week after the Blair Witch Project came out, another hugely influential film, spawned a whole genre of those found footage horror movies. And this was the next horror movie. 1 week later, another horror movie. Everybody thought this is the horror movie of the year when they saw Blair Witch. And then, of course, 1 week later, it got usurped by the huge popularity of The Sixth Sense, which was even bigger. I saw it in the theater. I had been really freaked out by the ending of the Blair Witch Project. Maybe I expected this to be scarier because it's really more of a drama, but I figured out the twist. But when I say that, I'm not patting myself on the back like, oh, I knew it from 2 minutes in. I figured it out maybe 15 minutes before the ending. Like, oh, I see what's happening here. And then when they have the little flashback and you see everything coming together, I'm like, oh, yeah. See, I picked up on all those little clues. But like I said, with minutes to go, like I'm not saying I figured this out the first half hour. But
that's because you
it's there.
You know, it's there, but also because, and I do the same thing, I'm always looking for certain things when I'm watching a movie, like who did it. I automatically start looking for who did it and usually figure out, most of the time I'm right because we're looking for it. But what if you were to go in just to watch a movie?
Well, I saw this.
It's even more of a blow at the
end. I saw it an opening night, so I did not know there was a twist at this point, but I figured it out once again because I think the movie plays fair. What I was going to say about the twist for me, because I'm going to counterpoint it to his next movie, what I thought about the twist was that the movie is too reliant on it. My personal opinion. I think the movie's good. I think it's overpraised. Although undeniably for me, I have to, all the things I said before, it changed the way films are made. So there's very few movies like that. But I thought that it's extremely well made. The tone management, the cinematography is absolutely beautiful. The performances are spot on, great performances. Bruce Willis gives a great performance in this movie, by the way. Not only Haley Joel Osment, but of course, Toni Collette as the mom, another performance that people don't really bring up because everyone's talking about the Haley Joel Osment performance, but all the performances, just fantastic across the board. And I think it's really well made. I know people say that it's so much deeper on rewatch. For me, it isn't as impactful once you know the twist. That's my ding on this film. Yeah. I know. I'm in the minority on this.
Yeah, I think that the fact that the movie was all about the twist and it was completely, I think it was, you're right, completely reliant on it, almost completely, that's what makes it so good. It would not be the same case today because you can't do that today. everybody's already expecting a twist. So if your whole movie is hanging on this, then it just becomes not a very good quality movie. I just can't imagine this being great today because of the expectation. But when you don't see it coming at that time, then having everything be reliant upon it would be pretty awesome that he could pull that off. Like when you were talking about how he needs to make a movie that will not be denied. And he accomplished that absolutely 100%. So I'm with the majority because at the time, that was pretty impressive, extremely impressive, actually.
Yeah, and for someone so early in their career, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I just think it's a little overpraised as just a film. For me, let's take out the context, which is undeniable, that, like I said, I will say that this is one of the most important films made in the past 25, 40 years, maybe even. That for me, as a film, it's good. It's very good. Some parts of it are really, really good. I just think overall the experience of it is it's good. I like it. I definitely like it. It's a solid film, but I just wasn't blown away the way so many other people are. And I don't think it holds up on repeat viewing. I do want to bring up a couple of really clever things he did so early in his career. And maybe he thought this out because there was more at stake here so early on that is not as well thought out in so many of his other films, including one that I just saw yesterday that I have to talk to you about. I'll get around to it. The fact that there is hardly any colors. Everything's almost black and white and gray in the entire film, but then there are colors of red. Whenever there's a color of red, there's something supernatural happening. And this is all planned out from the very first scene of the movie. So that's so smart, so well planned out. And more importantly is that, I guess we're just going to spoil this at this point, but that Bruce Willis is wearing over the course of the entire film clothes or articles of clothing that he touches in that opening scene. They've thought about his entire wardrobe, even though we're seeing different variations of it so that he's not always looking exactly the same, but they're smart enough to think, well, what was he wearing that day? And then using that as his wardrobe for the whole rest of the film. So it's very, very smart. And he plays fair. So many of these twist movies that get to the end and the twist is almost arbitrary. It oftentimes will be arbitrary where they shoot 4 different versions so that even the cast doesn't know what the final reveal is. And you're like, well, this could have just been anybody, because we don't know the clues until the last minute. This thing's playing fair from the beginning, which is part of the reason you actually can figure it out if you are really paying attention. And it is about dealing with loss, dealing with the trauma of being a child and having these experiences, and all the children that he interacts with, right? All oftentimes abused kids. So he has thoughts on his mind, and this is probably, if not his best script, absolutely one of his very best, for sure. By the way, I do want to call out that this got an A- cinema score, which seems a little low considering, but just to be clear on anything that's a horror movie, supernatural, even this is not really a horror movie, by the way, but even if you want to put it in that realm, horror movie fans are so finicky that an A- is actually very high. Very, very few horror movies even touch anywhere near the A realm. So this is a very high score. But I do want to call out the cinema scores because it's this idea that he had a rough go at it with audiences later in his career. So I want to talk about the follow-up to this. He makes Unbreakable, which comes out a year and a half after The Sixth Sense. He shows the script first to Disney because he had a good experience with them, despite the fact that they rejected him and fired people because of that deal. They did make this into a giant hit, so he was happy working with them again. They paid him $5 million for the script and $5 million to direct. This was the most a director had ever been paid. It was a huge payout for him. And I bring this up because I remember seeing this in theaters, and I absolutely love this movie. This is in 2000, before the whole rush of comic book movies. This is before all of that, even before the X-Men movies, for example, which came out in the early 2001, 2002. So even ahead of that, when comic book movies were rarely ever in theaters, and we have this movie, a ground level, naturalistic version of an origin story for a superhero. And I love this movie. And I remember walking out of theater and people were like, that sucked. And it shows the cinema score is a C on this movie. People did not like it. It made $248 million on a $75 million budget, much, much less successful than The Sixth Sense. People were expecting, I don't know, like a sequel to The Sixth Sense or something. And he gets the last laugh here because of something that happens later in his career. And I'll leave it at that for now. But tell me what you thought when you saw Unbreakable.
I loved Unbreakable. This is when I became such a fan of him. So I see Unbreakable right after, just like you did. And I'm like, this guy is a genius.
Yes.
He did a few things after that that's still, for me, confirmed this guy's a genius. Some of the stuff you didn't like, but I have reasons why I kept that theory going. But Unbreakable is a really interesting movie. I don't know. Interesting is the best way I can think of, because it's so thought provoking
Yeah.
all the way through, and it like yanks on your heartstrings also. So the performances here are also really, really good. So I was in love with this movie. I'm wondering, why did it get such a low score?
I think a lot of it had to do with expectations. People were expecting a giant twist. I think that's what was a curse he had. They were waiting for a giant twist. And the reason I liked Unbreakable so much, by the way, is it has for me, a very satisfying twist. And the movie is not reliant on that twist at all. The movie is a really successful movie, even without the twist. And then the twist is really satisfying on top of it. And I think people wanted that. I got totally blindsided by that insane twist. I have to assume that's what the disappointment was initially, because like I said, this was not very well regarded by audiences, but he gets the last laugh because he turns this into a trilogy basically. And when this got rejuvenated again as a full trilogy of films, people were bouncing off the walls. They were so excited. So I'm like, isn't that movie you hated? Now you love it. All right. Well, but you know what? Like I said, he got the last laugh. So good for him, because I think this is a really strong film. What I'm going to have a dividing line here when I'm going through his career. When I watch a movie, I always think to myself, if I'm going to write a review or discuss it here on the podcast, I always think, what is this movie about? And when I say, what is this movie about? I'm not talking about the plot. I'm talking about, like, why does this film exist? Why should I care about the actual plot machinations in this story, right? And I feel like so many of his films that don't work for me are really not about anything other than a twist or a concept or some goofy payoff of some kind, as opposed to the Sixth Sense is about emotionally dealing with tragedy, accepting loss, right? Whether that is someone who dies tragically or someone who's dealing with the death of someone close to them who's died tragically. And that is like seeped into the script. And Unbreakable is another film that's about something, right? It's about this guy who feels like he's a loser, who's proving himself to his son, who's proving to him that he has this worth. And that relationship between the father and son is so powerful in this film. And that's why it works, right? I think that's a big problem with genre movies in general. And it's not just M. Night's films, it's in general. But there's just nothing going on, under the covers. Speaking of dealing with loss and thematically, and a film that he followed this up with, and this one starts to maybe go in the direction of being more about itself than anything else. But I still really like this film, especially when it came out. This really worked in movie theaters. His third film, or third major film, is Signs, right? And this, of course, is with Mel Gibson and with Joaquin Phoenix before he became a giant star of his own, although this is coming already after Joaquin Phoenix got his Academy Award nomination for Gladiator. Gladiator 2 is coming out this year, by the way, but Gladiator. So he's already making a name for himself here. Once again, great performances across the board. Audiences like this a lot better. They gave it a B, which seems a little low, to be honest with you. But it was a huge hit, made over $400 million around the world on a $72 million budget. So very successful. And this works really well. This is, a little science fiction in there. There's definitely the influence of Night of the Living Dead, with the aliens being like what the zombies are trying to break in and get this family in their basement. So there's a whole aspect of that. But I thought this is a lot of fun. The use of video surveillance footage is really well done. The home invasion aspect of this is really well done. I forgot to call that out. I think Unbreakable is incredibly sophisticated visually. Just the shot selection, the way that Sam Jackson is always being shot through glasses, through reflections, through broken glass. So there's always this very cool, sophisticated reveal that's being done. And also, especially in Unbreakable, how scenes will start in very mundane ways, but almost end exactly like comic book framing, because once again, it's teasing the fact that we're actually seeing a comic book origin story. That's all very cool. And it extends to Signs. Once again, very sophisticated. There's a lot of comedy in Signs, and the comedy really works. and it counterpoints to the thrills. A lot of fun, very sparing use of special effects, but I think very effective. The less you see the aliens, something that people need to understand, the less you see the aliens, the better, oftentimes. Has a really stupid ending, but I'll forgive it for that. But what did you think of Signs?
It was good, but this is my problem. I'm not really into movies that feel very contained. And what I mean by that is like they're in this very specific,
You're stuck in the farm the
smaller,
whole time.
yeah. But I don't really like that. I like to see what is the next scene going to be? Where are they going to be? Even stuff like what are they going to be wearing? What will they say? Who will they meet now? So that's just me. So I wasn't as thrilled with this movie because it is too contained for my taste. But the thing about movies like that is that they really do have to be at least somewhat exceptional to be able to pull something off like that.
But you like
Prefer
Speak
mov-
No Evil. Speak No Evil is all in one place, pretty much.
Yeah, but that was really, really creepy. And it wasn't only in one place. They start off somewhere that is nowhere near where they end up. By the time they end up where everything's starting to really happen, I'm so riveted that I'm not worried that they're not going to be in another country. I just want to know what's going to happen next. And I didn't have that reaction to this movie, Signs. I knew this was it, and I'm interested, but I think I liked it less than you. Although, yes, it was a good movie. It was very well made. There was comedy in there. But I mean, if you're going to ask me how I feel about it, I was not as thrilled by this as some of his other movies. I was a little bored, which
I
is
like
not
I
great.
I seeing it in theaters. I enjoyed it a lot. I laughed a lot. Audience was definitely laughing a lot, and the scary parts were really scary. And it was fun. It was like a roller coaster ride type movie. But to your point, in general, I think that this one doesn't hold up so much. Like you watch it now, and yeah, the tense scenes are still tense, but it's kind of just okay. It's good. The
That's
performances
how
are
I
very
feel.
good, by the way. The performances are very good. The
Like,
kids are totally convincing. Mel Gibson does a great
yeah,
performance. Joaquin
I
Phoenix, great
said that
performance.
was
All of them.
good. That my reaction was that was good. But then I forgot all about it.
Okay. Then things start to turn for him. It's 2004. And before this movie comes out, and the movie is The Village, by the way, but before that movie comes out, something starts to happen to him and to his mythology. He makes this sci fi mockumentary called The Lost Secret of M. Night Shyamalan or something like that, where supposedly these people are making a documentary about him. He doesn't want people knowing this secret about himself, which apparently I'll spoil this for everybody because I don't even think you can find this thing anymore. The secret was that he drowned when he was 10 years old. And ever since he drowned, he had this other person that he was communicating. He was communicating with the dead, and that his scripts are coming from this communication with the dead. And nobody wants anyone to know the secret of M. Night Shyamalan, right? Which
Like,
is
who is he? Beyonce?
what's the whole thing is total baloney. But it's just the fact that it's so tired. By the way, part of the reason that the Blair Witch Project was so huge was that the week before it came out, the Sci-Fi Network had put out a documentary made by the very filmmakers who made the Blair Witch Project, telling people that this was a true haunting. And then, of course, when the movie comes out, people think they're watching a snuff film. So it was great marketing, right? So he's doing this 5 years later, like, okay, that's been done. Let's get past it. The Blair Witch Project's not even at that moment that big of a deal anymore. And that's the best he can do. And this is all a marketing ploy for this movie. And then the actual movie comes out and the critics start to turn on him, but audiences turn on him also. The Village opened with $20 million on its opening day. And it, at the time, had the worst multiplier on its opening day of any wide release. It was so people just rejected it. All that being said, he still draws an audience, by the way, just out of curiosity. It cost $60 million and made over $250 million. So it still made money. The film itself, actually, until a absolutely terrible twist ending, until then, it's actually really good. This is his direct response to September 11th, 2001. If Signs was a reaction to the trauma of watching something on TV and wondering, well, what's going to happen to my family now? And I think that's what Sign is about in context of that terrorist attack. This is the opposite of how people become so reactionary and so isolated that they cut themselves off. In a way, the cure is worse than the disease in that regard. And I think that as this parable, as this Twilight Zone episode type story, I think it's a really interesting metaphor. But man, that ending just lands like a cinder block. Although I know you like this thing a lot better than I do.
I did like it. I thought it was really good because everybody's so strange and creepy, but yet they're all very believable. I believed these people were existing in this way. And there's a lot of social commentary in there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So much. And then at the very end, the twist was kind of like, wow, this movie's even better than I thought. Like, that's how I felt about the twist.
Well, I knew that
it established the social commentary.
Yeah, for me, it didn't work. I think so much of the reaction to it was a backlash to people rolling their eyes at another twist ending, because I don't think the twist is delivered well. And it's telegraphed, by the way. I knew the twist. This, unlike The Sixth Sense, I knew what was going to be the twist here very, very early on, because I think he thinks he's being coy. But a couple of, I think Sigourney Weaver is speaking to, this is an incredible cast, by the way, another incredible. And you have Sigourney Weaver speaking to William Hurt, and they use a term that is like a slang term. And I'm like, oh, these people aren't in medieval times or whatever. These people are contemporary people. So I kind of knew right away. And once again, I think he's playing fair. He's putting those clues in there. And once you pick up on that and you start paying attention to those, he actually puts in a number of different clues in there. So he was playing fair. That's fine. I just thought that the whole way that it delivered at the end and the way it resolved itself is so silly. He, by the way, is in his own movies. He's the security guard at the end who sees the blind girl wandering out and doesn't say anything. It's just hilarious. Anyway, all of that is hilarious. But it does have, once again, absolutely great performances. Joaquin Phoenix does a great job. Adrian Brody. This film is packed with stars. Oh, and Roger Deakins, who does most of the cinematography for the Coen brothers, for example. It was just like, maybe the best cinematographer ever, who also did the cinematography for, I know, a movie you love, which is the assassination of Jesse James, which is such an incredible visually.
I love that movie.
Anyway, just an incredible, just an incredible cinematographer. But anyway, he's working with top-notch talent. This movie looks great. The scary scenes are pretty scary, although since I figured out the twist, I wasn't really scared. But they're beautifully staged and thematically interesting, right? He's a parent now. If you want to think about his personal life, you think about Dogtooth, for example. I'm metaphorically about to say a similar theme of trying to control these kids. And these kids want to wander out into the world, even if it's dangerous, right? Much less than in spite of that. And of course, we've spoken about Station 11, for example, very similar as well, right? So there's a lot of thematics here that definitely resonate. And to your point, I think this movie was so marked by its failure at the time critically. And if he had rebounded in another way, I think it would have been reappraised. But I think today, young people watching this movie for the first time, they love it. This has been really rediscovered as one of his classics. Still doesn't quite work for me, but I think the public agrees with you in this one.
I'm just ahead of my time.
That's right. The letterboxers love this movie. This has definitely been reclaimed for sure. But at the time, by the way, not only was there that really bad promo documentary, and then they follow up with this, not quite what they expect. Then things get really bad. Next, we're going to talk about Lady in the Water.
Oh my God, so funny though.
Yeah. Okay. So
I don't think it was intentional, but very funny.
Now, this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. I think he really starts to drink the Kool-Aid here for his own Kool-Aid, starts to think that he's infallible, because there's a whole book written about the making of this movie, by the way. He had been working with Disney this whole entire time since the success of The Sixth Sense. Disney was willing to make this movie as well, but the head of production read the script and said, I think there's some things you need to change here, and made some really intelligent commentary, which I'll point out when we break down the movie a little bit. But he was furious by any kind of feedback on his script, and he took the project over to Warner Brothers. A couple of things here about this. The movie, Lady in the Water, cost $70 million. All his movies are pretty expensive for what they are, by the way. But this is a movie that takes place in a motel swimming pool and the surrounding area of there, and shot on location outside of Philadelphia, and cost $70 million. There's no big stars in this movie. unlike some of the other movies, like The Village, for example, which had a very large set, had a lot of stars in the cast, Sigourney Weaver and William Hurt, just to name two. But this movie has no stars in it. Paul Giamatti was a well-respected actor at the time, but not a name brand or anything like that. Couldn't open a movie necessarily. And this movie's very expensive for what it is. Cinematography by Christopher Doyle. Speaking of working with people at the peak of their skills, if he had the best cinematographer in the world potentially for the previous film, he follows it up with Christopher Doyle doing cinematography here. Christopher Doyle, Celia, if you don't know, is a cinematographer for Wong Kar-wai, including, for example, In the Mood for Love, one of the most beautiful movies ever made in history.
I can't stop watching that movie. It's been years, and I watched it again the other day and just was hypnotized again. I think something in there is hypnotizing me. This movie's amazing. Oh my gosh.
There's alchemy in movies when the things all work together.
What is going on with that movie?
Yes, I'll have to have a whole digression on. I just read Sidney Pollack's book called Making Movies. He would be 100 years old this week. That's why there's been kind of a retrospective about him. And I finally read his book. And I highly recommend this to anybody who's interested in movies at all. He talks about exactly that. By the way, something that I had not seen, maybe I picked it up from him without realizing it, that first of all, when he reads a script, the first thing he asks himself is, what is this about? Meaning specifically that, like I mentioned before, what is it about beyond the plot, right? What is it actually about? And then another thing he mentions is that when everybody's clicking, when the actors and the director and the cinematographer and the editor and everything's just clicking, you make the movie and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, this movie's about something else. It's more than we expected when we went into it. And anyway, we talked about Silence of the Lambs recently, about a film that is in a way more than just a really solid thriller. There's some magic within it. And In the Mood for Love, another one of those. Well, anyway.
In the Mood for Love is so amazing that their facial expressions don't even require that they have a dialogue.
Oh, right. It was shot intentionally as if it was a silent film. So absolutely. But speaking of movies that are not what I described before, not more than the sum of their parts, Lady in the Water. By the way, Paul Giamatti in this movie, thank God this did not ruin his career, because he gives an exceptional performance in this movie. This movie, which is absolutely ridiculous and wasting everybody's talents across the board. And here's something interesting about this. The genesis of this movie, unlike some of the other ones we mentioned here, was a story, a nighttime story, a fable that he had invented. He was telling stories to his daughters when he was tucking them in and putting them to bed. And then these stories were evolving. And by the way, we probably have all done something similar with our children as well. We had the story that we made up for them. We told, this is his version of that story. And the second thing I would say about it is, when you think about these characters, like the guy who only works out one side of his body and all these weird people that in the end all have to fit together perfectly to rescue this mermaid, a spoiler for this ridiculous movie, that when you think about that, you imagine a picture book version of this. I've read so many picture books to my daughter. I can picture this on the page working. These people, they all live together in this complex. You can imagine a cartoon book that actually could work. But instead, he takes what should be like a Curious George adaptation and he directs it like this very serious, everybody's whispering. It's like The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable again.
This should be like an episode of South Park. That would be amazing as an episode of South Park, because it is funny. What an awful
they may have spoofed. They may have spoofed it on that.
They should. Oh, I can't wait to find out. I'm gonna check that out. But it is a spoof. The whole thing is a spoof.
Unintentionally, though.
I thought so. I don't even know what to say about this movie, because when I was watching it, I said, is it supposed to be funny? Like dry humor?
No, it is not.
It's not, though. Yeah.
It's so serious. Think about Giamatti's when he breaks down finally at the end. Think about that scene. This is not a comedy. It's obviously not intentionally funny. It is so earnest. It's as if it is a Curious George comic book or kids book adaptation, but it's shot so seriously by the cinematographer who does Wong Kar-wai's movies with that level of impeccable detail and earnestness. And none of this works. But that's not even the worst of it. The two things that were requested to be changes are the two things that make this thing really almost derail his entire career. One is that he was so angry about movie critics criticizing The Village that he has the critic in this film killed viciously by a monster. You can't be a very popular filmmaker and then murder critics in your movie unless you're doing it as a joke. You know, the South Park guys can do that, but this is not in that tone. But so much worse than that, so much worse than that is that M. Night Shyamalan plays a character in this movie, and the whole point, the mermaid is trying to rescue him because he's going to write a story. This is what he thought of himself at the time. He's going to write a story that is going to be so important that no one will understand. It'll change all of society. But he's like Jesus, basically. It will take decades for that to happen, but he's going to be murdered. This story is going to be so powerful that he will write this story. He'll be martyred. And then decades later, 30 or 40 years later, it'll become like the cornerstone of all of civilization. So he's basically saying, like, I am Jesus. I am Jesus. You cannot put yourself in the movie and say you are Jesus. This is top.
But that's why I thought he was joking.
There is nothing in this film that ever indicates that it's joking.
I did not go to a movie theater for this, but I was just watching it one day, like years ago, and thinking, oh, I can't wait to see this. I've heard terrible things, but then I try not to listen because I don't really want to know what the movie's about. And I'm watching it and I'm a little buzzed. This is what I'm doing that Friday or something. So I thought it was supposed to be funny, but then became confused because of everything you just said. Like, it's not funny enough to be funny, but the Jesus thing was weird.
I saw this in the theater, and in an empty theater, by the way. This movie was a huge flop. So if he thought he was going to make the movie he wanted to make and that everybody was going to turn out because he had such loyal fans, nope, didn't happen. But more importantly is seeing this in the theater, and obviously everybody just laughing out loud at some of the twists towards the end. But that moment when he's talking to his sister saying, I have to write it. I know I'm going to die, but I have to write it to save the world. It's so insane, like that someone could be that full of themselves at that moment. It's utterly shocking. You really should watch it because it is an incredible, completely misunderstanding the role of a filmmaker. Basically, he really thought that he could just say anything that came out of his head and people would line up to see it. It's astounding.
I was confused by this movie because I'm thinking, is he being as narcissistic, assuming it's a serious movie, or is he really kidding? I mean, it's that bad that I was baffled.
I am pretty sure that he does not have that tearful scene with his sister if he meant this as a joke.
The concept is preposterous just to begin with.
Right.
So I went in there thinking it was some kind of black comedy, which is what that's why I'm like,
it is
Trap going
it
to
is
be
a black comedy, but the best kind of black comedy.
Preposterous. Yeah. People should watch it. It's absurd. I don't like all his movies. I've said this before that I am a fan of him because I'm never bored, but like not because I love all his movies. And this one was like a fail.
Yeah, I was talking about the cinema scores for these things. The Village got a C, which is bad. Like I said before, even like a B or a B minus is not considered a great cinema score. Anything that's below like an A something or B plus at best. So a C is pretty bad for The Village. Lady in the Water, believe it or not, got a B minus, but it was a huge flop. So this is important because the opening weekend, it did terrible. But you have to remember, these are the self-selecting, diehard M. Night fans are turning out, and they are giving it a B minus, which once again is not a great grade. But Celia, his next film, gets a D. A D, which is extremely hard to get a D from Cinema Score. If you get a C, you're like, man, this movie's going to be a disaster. The average grade that someone's giving you is a C. So think about it. Most of the people walking out of there are just like, it barely passes. And half of them thought it was worse than that. So to that point, next movie, The Happening, gets a D. That's the average grade that everyone's giving it. No one's giving it an A.
It is funny though. Like it's genuinely funny. Yes. I'm a little confused as to, was he trying to be funny? But like the concept of it is like not as preposterous. I mean, maybe it is as preposterous as The Lady in the Water. Although The Lady in the Water is more like I guess it's I don't even know how to describe these movies. I would find it less interesting and less vast than the horror of of this other movie. Oh my god.
You know what's so funny
It's like,
is that I've been
is
talking
that a
about how
breeze? Oh my god, the wind. The wind. Like there's just stuff you can't hide from, and it's very funny. I thought that movie was very entertaining.
the crazy thing about it is that there is so many up until this point, even Lady in the Water, the performances from these actors like Giamatti are terrific. Like he's getting really great performances from these actors across the board. It like revitalized Bruce Willis's career, for example, making those two movies with him, right? So that is the template up until this point. But man, and I'll say something complimentary about it. This is rated R, by the way, The Happening. So that's part of the reason. Audiences did turn out, by the way, made over $160 million, a big jump up in his box office compared to the disaster that was Lady in the Water. And so it made money. That's why he keeps making movies. I think having the R rating, people, the first time he had an R rating, by the way, made people think, oh, maybe he's going to really go for it. He doesn't really go for it, but he does go for it in some interesting ways. And complimenting at the beginning of this film, when this virus or whatever it is, they don't know what it is initially, starts to make everybody commit suicide, which is creepy. Now, in retrospect, after the pandemic, to watch this, it resonates in ways that it probably didn't even intend at the time, but it's really intriguing and really well executed. There's some really disturbing images where all those construction workers are jumping off the buildings, for example, in Philadelphia. So a lot of that stuff is really well done, very creepy. But then the performances, when the next scene we see is Mark Wahlberg trying to explain
He's
some
so
biological.
funny in this.
He's hilarious. Like he's trying to
so
sell this
funny.
biological. He's just so inappropriate for this role. He's made fun of this, by the way. Like in interviews, he just talks about like I had no idea what was going on in that movie half the time. He's really trying to
That's what it
distance
looks
himself from it.
like. When I was watching him perform this, I'm like, this is a black comedy. Just look at his performance. So overacting. I guess you would if what you're running away from is, I mean, you don't know what it is. Is it air? Ugh, I don't even know what to say. I loved his performance in this movie.
This movie is an absolute disaster, but and people should watch just there's cuts, super cuts on YouTube if you don't want to watch the whole movie that are just some of this hilarious line readings with Mark Wahlberg. This is a bad, this concept of this is so misbegotten that there's some kind of pollen or something that the earth is attacking us because we're killing it. And this thing is making us commit suicide. So it's pretty silly. It could actually work. There are somewhat similar storylines, whether it is zombie outbreak movies, things like that, that could be theoretically, you can even read The Last of Us as a metaphor of a similar one where nature itself is basically eradicating us because we're attacking nature. So it's not like this concept is impossible. It's just the way it's executed when, for example, like you said, they're running away from a breeze they were looking at the wind pattern in the grass and they're like, oh no, the wind is coming this way. It's so silly.
Did he really not know how to act? I'm not an actor, but I would be like, what is my tone for this movie?
I don't know if he's the right person for this period. And yeah, and it's just, but it's very funny. And things get worse from him, at least from a critical standpoint. He hits another record low there with Rotten Tomato scores, basically. But then he makes The Last Airbender, which costs a fortune, $150 million. It actually breaks even because it makes over $300 million. But critics really did not like this. And audience didn't either. It didn't get a sequel, obviously, but it made money in theaters. People showed up to see it. It's just boring, by the way. It's just a very boring adaptation of the story. And of course, people are diehard Last Airbender fans, so they were disappointed by what they got. But it's not a catastrophe the way you would think. Although at this point, everyone's piling on. They just want to name everything he makes a catastrophe. But the next movie he makes is an absolute catastrophe. He makes After Earth with Will Smith. Have you seen this thing?
I think you know what? I don't know if I got through it. I'm going to go with no. I think I tried to see it and then I was bored.
After Earth is like Lady in the Water for Will Smith. And it's amazing that he gets M. Night to direct it for him because it's exactly the same thing. This is when Will Smith kind of took a backseat in his own career and was trying to make Jaden Smith into a big star. And he had the Karate Kid movie, which had been hugely successful.
I did see that. Okay. I just got a flashback. Okay. I saw
and now in this movie, he wants to basically prop up his son. So in a way, it's about trusting your son to be an adult and replace you and yada, yada, yada. And in this movie, which is part of the reason people didn't like it, Will Smith is in that marketing, but he basically gets knocked out in this spaceship. And then Jaden is traversing this alien landscape, being pursued by this weird alien that they brought with them. The plot is ridiculous. But what's funny about it is the genesis of this story was Will Smith had an idea for a story where he gets into a car wreck and Jaden is on his own and they have like a walkie-talkie, but he's trapped inside the car and Jaden's being pursued by some kind of wild animal. And it's very naturalistic. And then somewhere along the way, people said, well, we'll fund it for you if you make it sci-fi. So he goes, what if 1,000 years in the future? And then they start saying, we're going to make comic books. It's going to be a trilogy. There's going to be a spin-off series. And the movie, like Lady in the Water, is just some ideas thrown at the board and without any connective tissue. And it's absolutely preposterous. And it lost a ton of money. It was an absolute fiasco.
I remember this movie. I remember saying, is this just a showcase for his kid? Because I wouldn't mind that if this wasn't so boring. And then I don't think I watched it all the way through. I remember trying to watch it. And then I think something came up. And then I never remember to go back and finish the movie.
It's totally not worth it.
This is how boring it is,
it's
in
so
my
boring.
opinion.
And it's hilarious, by the way, that Will Smith, for example, gets knocked out and then he wakes up for 5 minutes and then he gets knocked out again. It's like they're trolling the audience. You know, he's not going to be awake for this movie. It's so crazy.
I don't know. I don't recommend anybody watch that.
I do not recommend it. It's not even worth watching as a so bad it's good. It's just boring.
No, it's very boring because
they spent it's very expensive.
Before. Oh,
it's very expensive, and the special effects are awful. Looks terrible. Okay, so this is amazing. When I looked at these all next to each other, I felt like there were multiple times where he could not get a movie made, and it's amazing to me that Lady in the Water is 2006, Happenings 2008, The Last Airbender is 2010, After Earth 2013. So he's continuously making movies. I for some reason, I really felt like there was this gap. Maybe it's because I wasn't seeing his movies in theaters. So I felt like there had been like 10 years since he put out anything that mattered in some ways. But he knows after Earth that he is toxic. He cannot get his movie made. He decides to make a super low budget horror movie and sell it, and no one will take it. No one will take it. So what he decides to do is to get a mortgage on his own home, and he makes for $5 million himself a movie called The Visit, which I've just seen this week. And this movie comes out. It gets bought by Blumhouse, very popular horror movie producers now, but always make movies on a very low budget. And this began their template. So he put his own money in, and it was a huge hit. For $5 million, this movie made $98 million, around smaller than basically any other film he'd made since his rise to fame in terms of dollars, but very financially successful, especially for him because he paid for the movie. So he got a big chunk of that back end back to himself. It's found footage, going back to the Blair Witch Connection all the way at the beginning. It's the first time he's shot found footage. And it's interesting because there's comedy in it. He had prepared, because he didn't know if people would buy this. This is actually interesting. He made a straight up horror cut of the movie, a comedy only cut of the movie, and then an in-between cut, which is the one that he basically released into theaters. Have you seen The Visit? What did you think of it?
Oh, I love that movie. That was good. I recommend everyone see that. That was so good. And the performances were fantastic. I jumped back on his bandwagon after I saw that. The kid was great. How funny is he? Like he has
the rapping thing.
Perfect.
I wasn't expecting that.
He's got great comedic timing, this boy. He was making me laugh all the time.
Yes. My opinion of it, I just saw it. This is one of the catch-up ones that I was missing. And for me, this didn't really work for me. It wasn't terrible. It just, the scary parts weren't scary. The comedy should have been even more so. But to your point, I think both of the kids give really good performances. And he did make me laugh. He was very funny. Good for him for resuscitating his career. I thought this was fine. This got a B minus from Cinema Score. I didn't call that out. So it's good. It's better than these D's and terrible movies he had been recently getting, the scores he'd been getting. So it's better. It made money, like I mentioned, on a very small budget, and he funded it himself, so he cashed out. But I hadn't seen
didn't
this
think
one,
it was.
and it was very middle of the road. It's like meh, which is, by the way, this is what I don't want to see in Trap, hopefully. I don't want it to be just this. Like, it's fine. I would rather get The Happening or get Split, which we're going to talk about in just a minute.
Well, what I liked about it was the performances, because I was
Yeah.
entertained because these people were really funny. Again, I'm not sure if he intended it to be as funny as it was, but I didn't think it was scary. I
No.
thought it was fun.
He definitely intended it to be scary. I think I mentioned that at the top of the conversation, but he actually made 3 edits of this film. The one we saw is like a blend of the 2 previous edits, but he made one edit that was much darker and all horror, basically. And he made another edit where it was like a slapstick comedy. And this is the in-between version that he released. So the comedy is intentional for sure.
Do you think like the other 2 are out there? I would like to see them.
They're not, unless they're bonus material on the DVD or something, but I've not heard of it. But I would like to see the comedic version for sure. I think that would work better for me in this particular case.
I agree, because I thought it was just funny.
I also don't think it's scary in any way, other than if you think old people are scary, and Sona has said like old people are scary. So if that is a real fear of yours, then yes, it works. But that is not enough to scare me in a movie.
Old people can be scary if like their mind is faulting a little bit, what they're going to do next. And I have experience with that. There's no logic to the behavior that I'm seeing. And then how do you react to this situation? You can't use logic to react to it. So yeah, old people can be scary.
M. Night apparently does have some kind of phobia of old people, because we're going to talk about old soon. But also, remember that scene, one of the most memorable scenes in that terrible movie, The Happening, is when Betty Buckley, they're staying at her house and she is infected and they don't realize it until late in the game. And you start seeing her outside just like walking backwards. That's a very memorable scene in that film. It's once again going back to how absolutely preposterous that movie is and how terrible it is across the board. There are scenes in it that are really well made. He still can direct excellent scenes, and he can't help it but be a good craftsman, even when the stories are absolutely bonkers. But I will call out here in regards to that The Visit itself as a found footage film, because of that, but not only because of that, it's a little bland visually. And obviously it's supposed to be shot by this girl, but it doesn't feel impressive visually like basically all his other films do.
But because she's shooting it, that would make sense also.
That's the context. Right. I agree. Okay, next film I think is much more successful. One of his absolute best films, in my opinion. This one, once again, having the success of The Visit, he made money on that, a lot of money on it, because he funded it himself. He's like, I'm going to fund my next movie too. And I'm going to make a movie called Split, which features James McAvoy and Anya Taylor-Joy giving 2 terrific performances, as is often the case, with minor exceptions, usually the case in his films. And in this regard, this film works so well because it, once again, speaking of twists, this film works perfectly well as, first of all, the revelation that this guy may have multiple personality disorder, or maybe it is something supernatural. Can we trust what he's seeing in his own mind? And then, of course, the double twist that not only is this actually happening, but wow, the audience, when I saw this, went absolutely bonkers at the end when Bruce Willis is there in the diner in the final moments, and you realize, oh my God, this is a side sequel to Unbreakable. It was a huge success and made almost $300 million around the world. He funded it himself for $9 million. He made a boatload of money, and this is a really fun movie.
That movie was scary.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I've said this before. It's like, oh, how boring. She keeps saying this. But the things that like humans do But the fact that the character became so much the personality that he was in the moment was terrifying.
Yeah,
So,
McAvoy is terrific in this film. He should have had the
and
Academy
then
Award nomination, I think, for. Although this is a
it was
completely
nuts.
misrepresentation of mental illness, regardless, the way that he can switch gears from scene to scene is really excellent.
And then the concept
Yeah.
is terrifying. And then because of all these multiple personalities, there are some of the personalities where you actually feel sorry for them. So the
Yes.
empathy
Yeah.
is involved. So there's a lot of layers to this movie.
Yeah. And his
And it's
relationship.
terrifying.
Yeah. And speaking of those excellent performances, I think it's not only his performance, obviously jumping from one persona to another, but Anya Taylor-Joy, who's one of my favorite young actresses today. We have to talk about Furiosa, by the way, which is about to premiere on HBO Max. We'll definitely have that review coming up. I think she's usually exceptional in everything she does. And in this regard, I love how she is code switching, right? Like talking to these different personas in different ways, being tough when she needs to be tough, being seductive when she needs to be seductive, and being manipulative when she's talking to a weak character, and how she is trying to use her personality basically to get herself out of the situation. And then you see her flashbacks to her, honestly, a pretty dark backstory here for a movie that's PG-13. I was surprised after the fact to realize as I was leaving the theater that it was PG-13, considering how grim her backstory is. I didn't think they would, address sexual assault in that way in a movie that was PG-13. But regardless, it's a very dark film. He really takes his PG-13 as far as it can go. And yeah, I think this is a huge success as a film, and as improving his mythology, reclaiming Unbreakable, which had already had this cult following, and making it relevant again. 20 years later, I think it's the best trick he's pulled since The Sixth Sense, for sure.
I saw Split, I would say maybe 2 months ago, and it had the same impact nearly, because now I know more about it. So a lot of the things that were happening when you first see it are gut punches, but I still had that reaction. Whoa, this is insane, the whole movie. And some people, I've heard people say, oh, he was overacting. I'm like, his character has many multiple personalities. So as he embodies each personality, he's really intense. There's no personality in there that's subtle, but that's what I loved about it.
Yeah, and it's funny. He even gets to use that against her later when he's pretending to be a different persona. It's really well done, I think. And I agree. I think this one holds up on revisit for sure, unlike a lot of the other ones. All right, he follows that up. Huge success, lots of money he makes. The next film he makes is Glass. So he ends the trilogy immediately following up Split, officially making this all part of the same universe as Unbreakable, bringing back Sam Jackson, bringing back Bruce Willis. And this film, critics savaged it. Audiences were lukewarm on it. It got a B cinema score, so not as good as the previous one. And it only made $250 million. Once again, he financed it himself. This is his new pattern, by the way. He's his own bank now. The film was a hit, don't get me wrong, based on that budget and the return on it budget-wise. But it was still considered a disappointment, because when you think how excited everybody was to see this movie, you would have assumed it would make a lot more money than the previous one. And it ended up making less. And I understand why. I remember seeing this one, and it's not a terrible film, but it's a weird way to wrap up this mythology where these people are mostly stuck in an asylum together. They're in a room, one room most of the time. They rarely interact. And then finally they bust out, and you're like, here is the battle royale. And the battle royale happens on people's cell phones. So you only see snippets of what's happening. And that's it. That's the end of the movie. It's bizarre. And also the fact that Bruce Willis, spoiler for everybody, dies by drowning in a puddle of water. A very strange way to kill his character off. But
I agree. Not a great way to end the trilogy, but not a bad movie. It was okay.
It's okay.
I don't like saying stuff is
It's
okay.
the worst of the three. I think it's the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I think this is why people were disappointed. In my mind, I assumed that he had made this tiny budget, $9 million movie. It had been a phenomenal success. And now everyone's so amped up for a real comic book movie, right? Like he's basically create an origin story for the superhero, origin story for the supervillain. We have Mr. Glass in the background. And could you imagine that he had gone in, partnered up with a studio? All these films are very like grounded. They're not giant special effect extravaganzas. I understand that. But not that he would make this cheap movie that's shot pretty much just in this abandoned penitentiary, that he would actually take some of that money with the studio and then have a big battle at the end and just double the budget, spend 50, $60 million, right? But for him to just say, okay, we're going to shoot 80% of this movie in a couple of rooms, literally, Bruce Willis is in one room the whole entire time. And I'm like, this is what we get at the end. And then, of course, you're waiting. You know, they're going to bust out. Mr. Glass has a plan. There's going to be some huge battle royale. And there's not. There's just people talking about it on the news. And I'm like, that's it. That's what we get. I was pretty disappointed.
Yeah, not great. And again, I do not love when things are too boxed in.
Yeah.
Either, like the atmosphere. I get bored. So there were moments where I'm like, I'm kind of bored.
Yeah. This is definitely
And
a boring film.
you know,
Oftentimes, I agree.
yeah, oftentimes. But there's enough in it that you're not like, I'm bored. And he's such a strange thinker when he makes his movies. So, I mean, I hung in there because I'm like, okay, this guy is, you know, a little off the rails most of the time. So who knows what's going to happen? But then also because of that, it does become disappointing when it's over.
Yes, this is a very disappointing film by the end. And it really feels, honestly, like this is the minimum he could have done to wrap up the trilogy. And that's pretty disappointing, obviously. Especially after he had basically hit a home run with the last film. He probably didn't even anticipate that people would be so hyped up for a sequel to Unbreakable. And then he immediately was like, I'm going to wrap up this trilogy. That's going to be my next project. And it's like, and I'm not really going to give you anything you want to see. I'm like, okay. The weirdest fan service of all times, I think.
Yeah, for fan service, what you're saying, like in a way, it's annoying. And I'm not in his head. So who knows if this is what is really going on in his brain. But to just assume that he can throw something out there just because he's him,
right,
and then be cheered on for it, I don't love that.
That's in 2019. And then, of course, in 2020, we have the pandemic, and he shoots a movie in 2020. And he wanted to shoot something. He funded it himself. Surprise, surprise, yet again. Budget's pretty high for what it is. It costs $18 million. It comes out during the pandemic. It's actually a minor hit. This is when theaters just started reopening. And of course, the reason it was even shot during the pandemic was because he came up with a concept intentionally. What's something I could shoot outdoors completely? And he shot the movie Old, which once again was another one of my blind spots. I caught up with this one too. And I really was hoping, I've heard reviews for this when it came out were not very kind. The audience reaction was pretty low. It only got a C+ cinema score. So I wasn't running out to see it. And then I was like, I'll wait. Eventually I'll catch up with it. And I finally caught up with it. It's on HBO Max, by the way. Anybody wants to see it, very easily available on HBO Max. And I have to say that I was hoping to be one of those people going like, this is actually underappreciated. This movie is so ridiculous that I can't take it serious for 1 second.
It's
Nothing.
so dumb.
If you take any one aspect of the plot and think about it for 1 minute, the whole thing falls apart. The whole thing. It's not one thing undoes the plot. If you think about any one of these individual plot points, these important plot points, and you're like, but what? Why? Huh? It's none of it works at all. It's ridiculous.
I agree. I was watching that going, why am I watching this?
Right.
First of all, I don't really care about these people. They're not presented in a way where you're very invested.
You don't know them. You don't spend any time with them. Right. Exactly.
No. So I'm like, okay, so these people I don't know are getting really old. That's really it. That's all that's happening.
He needs someone to help him with his scripts. I would fix this plot immediately in a couple of ways. Number one, they are aging, but not this fast, right? Number two, we don't need an explanation as to how they're trapped on this island. Like they just can't get off. Like make this purely metaphorical, right? Because that's what the film is trying to be. It's about watching your children grow up, letting them go, being terrified, coming up with every possible explanation for, I don't want to die. I'm not going to die. We're going to fix this. And then eventually just accepting it in the end, which is what we see. It's the progression. It's what works in the material. And there are a handful of scenes in the movie that are really powerful and really beautiful. Mostly Gabriel Gar and what's her name? Krebs, her first name. We're both great actors, and them reconciling their marriage. And he's like, I don't even remember what we were fighting about. So those scenes are really beautiful, really poignant. And in the right movie, they would have made me cry. But like you said, the movie's an hour and a half long, and it's taking place over the course of a day. And it doesn't feel like a day. It's so rushed. It feels like this is taking place over the course of an hour and a half. I'm supposed to care about these people? I've known them for 25 minutes. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it was strange because I'm watching it with high
Vicky
hopes.
Crepes.
I always have high hopes with his movies because I'm waiting for something really out of the box to happen to be like, wow. So they're gonna get really old and they can't get off this island. And like I still feel like they could have got off the island like the whole time. I'm like, can't you just like go over there? And then I think they tried, but then
there was only one way through, which was through the coral. So, okay. So let
through
me
the
just...
coral. That's the
Right.
other thing.
Right.
They made such
The
a
only way
big
out.
deal about the coral.
It was
They're
the only
like,
way
oh.
out. If you tried to swim out, you would get killed. If you tried to climb the rocks, you would get killed. You would black out basically and then die whether you're swimming or climbing the rocks. I have to throw in a couple of the logistics here because it's so ridiculous. First of all, there's the whole, why don't they make people age? But let's say they're aging 10 times faster. So everything that happens, the kids growing more distant, getting pregnant, all this is happening over the course of a week. As soon as you're saying they're aging 10 years every hour, well, they're all going to be dead in 5 or 6 hours. Even if they get off here, they're going to be 85 years old at the end of this movie. So it feels so pointless in a way. So it doesn't give you that urgency of like, they have to find a way out when within a time period that would make some sense. Like I said, you can do all the things that happen here if you just say they're aging 10 times faster. You'd wake up the next morning and, oh my God, the kids are older. Instead of being like, you're talking to them and then they put new actors in there. It's like, you didn't see them growing in between. I go on travel for a week and I come home and I'm like, oh my God, my daughter's taller. You would notice, I'm just saying, right? These people growing.
Obviously time is of the essence. So what if you might get killed by the coral? Wouldn't you just be like, all right.
They didn't know about the coral. The coral is the twist at the end where the other kid had given them the escape. But anyway, I do have to call out
somewhere during the boredom.
I have to call out some of the stupidity. Like I said before, my screenplay mind, I'm saying here, I can fix this script and maybe he should have run it by somebody else just with a few tweaks. I think it could have been better. But then I have to call out the absolutely ridiculous things here. If coming onto this beach and then trying to escape crushes your brain or whatever, and you cannot escape, which I don't think there's any physical way that would work, or that you would age more quickly on this beach. Let's take all that for granted. Regardless, even if that's the case, how did someone actually discover this beach? How did they escape? How many thousands of people must have eventually wandered through the beach, and then maybe one person finally swim through the coral? And then if that happened, that now they've built this resort nearby, and on top of that, it's all this facade for this research for this pharmaceutical company, and all of that is just so hilarious to me. But that reveal at the end where we're supposed to be sympathetic to the pharmaceutical company, it's like, our experiments here have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And so we're supposed to be like, oh, by revealing that this is happening, first of all, in a way, you're killing hundreds of thousands of people who've been saved by these pharmaceuticals. But more than that, think about it. There are people right now who are intentionally living in isolation inside of mountains to prepare for maybe going to Mars. People are willing to sacrifice themselves to go on a Mars mission and possibly die. Could you imagine someone is going to die of some congenital disease and you tell them that this place exists and they're like, will you sign up? because then you're going to die anyway. We can see if this chemical actually works on you. And someone will be like, I'll be dead in 3 months. I'll definitely sign up for that. My point is, you could get people to sign up for this. You don't have to murder people secretly for this whole project. It's so ridiculous on its face.
Like entire families?
Yes.
Like it's so strange.
Children and everything. Like it's so
like
crazy.
How is that going to earn sympathy? The whole thing made no sense.
Right.
I feel
as soon as people know about this, right?
Just talking about it. Like,
they're recruiting these people, sending them these brochures because they have these diseases. You couldn't find someone who has MS who doesn't have any kids or who's divorced
or just give people the opportunity. You're going to die most likely, but you can do some good in the world and we'll give your family millions of dollars. People
Absolutely.
would be like, sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly.
What's the worst case scenario? I die a little earlier and my whole family gets millions of dollars because they can afford it, right?
Hey, so, we just watched House of the. We just watched House of the.
With sympathy.
We just watched House of the Dragon this week, and those people offered themselves up to be burned alive because maybe there's a chance they're dragon riders. Maybe.
Well, they have nothing else to really hope for. I mean, they're in a situation that's so dire.
I'm saying that if you're months away from dying from some uncurable cancer, you may also be like, hey, give my family $5 million. Hey, I'll take that chance. And I might even get cured.
No, you're going to lure tourists who really just want to suntan.
So ridiculous. And who's the guy?
Watermelon or whatever they're hoping for on this island, a barbecue.
And of course,
it's not great.
And of course, who's the guy who's driving them to the beach? It's M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, it's so weird. This movie was weird in the way that I don't approve of.
Yes, this is
I
bad.
felt like I wasted my time and that my intelligence was being insulted.
Yeah, I didn't think this worked.
Great.
Yeah, I didn't think this worked. Okay, that takes us only one more between there and here. And this film is mixed, although I think this one's a step in the right direction for him for sure. It's a Knock at the Cabin, which is a adaptation of the Paul Tremblay novel, which I've also read. And I think we had a conversation, which I never published, about this very film. And the big mistake this film makes is by changing what happens in the book at the end, it negates the whole point of the book to a large extent. But aside from that, until the finale, this is actually a really strong film, I think, and more resonant now in the face of the pandemic, obviously, but terrific performances in this movie, really, truly terrific performances.
Yeah, we talked about that. Honestly, I don't remember. What were my main objections when you told me that the ending was different? Because I remember being annoyed that they changed the ending.
Yeah, so once again, spoilers for all these films, but spoilers for this one. In the book, in the end, when it's irrefutable that this is happening, and as I mentioned, I never published that conversation, so I guess I have to add it as context. In the film, there are early signs that something weird is going on, and it's very apparent pretty early on that this is a true worldwide apocalypse that's happening. In the book, there's more plausible deniability for a while, for part of the way through, and we're also inside the characters' heads. So the Jonathan Groff character has hit his head, and he's having spiritual visions. He wants to sacrifice himself because he believes in this more. But then his husband thinks that he's just, concussed, right? Which is possibly true. So there is plausible deniability throughout the book. And then, of course, at the end, when it is irrefutable, but everything has happened. And of course, once again, spoilers, the daughter's died. She actually dies in the book. That they basically decide that I don't care if this is real. I don't care if we do sacrifice ourselves to save humanity, that we don't care. Like, they are so at their wits' end, and they feel so used and tormented by this God that's judging them or whatever it's doing, that he says, screw everybody. We are not going to comply, basically. And that is quite a choice, obviously. And it speaks to the fact that once they've lost their daughter, they don't care. They don't care anymore. Right? So it's very nihilistic, but probably emotionally true.
The ending that you proposed, what, because I didn't know there was two endings, sounded so much better than the ending that the movie gave us. But that being said, the movie was pretty good.
Here I am again, present tense, Victor. I needed to cut off the conversation there. We had some technical issues and we needed to get back to work. But I did want to close the loop on Knock at the Cabin and a few interesting correlations in watching Trap last night in preparation for this review. First of all, Knock at the Cabin, as we were mentioning in the discussion, fails in its ending. I don't know why he changed the ending versus the book. But until the ending, it is a very convincing and fascinating film. It actually does have these themes of faith, which have been in many of M. Night's films in the past. And of course, of family and what we're willing to sacrifice for our families. So this does feel like one of his more personal films. It's definitely one of his better films. It is beautifully made. Dave Bautista gives a terrific performance, just this big brute, but with this very gentle heart. And it could be a contrived character, but he totally pulls it off. And for me, home invasion is always a touchy subject because it hits some raw nerve in me. And honestly, I haven't talked about the box office yet. Unlike, this is his least successful of all of his major releases. I mentioned that The Visit had made $98 million on a very small $5 million budget. Once again, this one was self-financed, Knock at the Cabin. He made it for $18 million. And it made only $55-60 million around there worldwide. So it probably broke even, but it didn't make any money. And that's a little disappointing because I did think this was one of his better films. As to why it failed, this is not actually a home invasion film, but it does, the easiest way to market it is as a home invasion film. And home invasion films in general have limited box office potential. There's never been a blockbuster home invasion film unless it's hiding inside of another film. Like Signs is kind of a home invasion film, but it's hiding inside of an alien invasion film. But even something like The Strangers, which just got a reboot this year, is not ever going to be a blockbuster. And even the original is not a blockbuster. And I think that is probably the most successful home invasion film of all times. Purely home invasion. There's slasher films that could be considered home invasion. Yeah, that's very nebulous, though. And I think that's part of the reason that the film didn't attract an audience. And those home invasion sequences early on are very troubling. But pretty soon it reveals itself to not be that at all. And yeah, this is a good one. If you like his more serious films, and this is definitely grimmer in tone than most of those, then do check this out, or check it out again if you were disappointed the first time you saw it. I believe it's still on Peacock. It might be on Amazon Prime now as well. The other thing that only struck me when I was actually watching Trap and I was discussing After Earth here in the conversation with Celia is how strange that, and hopefully this is not something that we're going to see happen to M. Night, I hope not, but Will Smith really had a rough patch in his career where the focus of his career was to try to make Jaden and Willow into stars. He was trying to prop them up, and he took the focus off of his own strengths as a movie star. And I think fans felt like they were having the kids shoved down their throats, and it hurt him, and it didn't pay off necessarily with the kids. I mean, the kids are still young. They could still have very long, successful careers, but this forcing them into blockbusters early in their career did not seem to work out the plan, at least. And I think it even hurt the marriage. This is all tabloid stuff, but it's just interesting that he hit that rough patch. And then we have M. Night having worked with Will Smith and his son on a film that was the nadir of their careers, basically. And looking at that and saying, hey, I should try to do that with my daughters. So I don't think he took the right lessons from that. And I do hope that this isn't putting a strain on his marriage, because we're going to get into the spoilers momentarily. And it doesn't seem that it's healthy in that marriage either. In the fictional marriage, I should say. All right, one more thing I wanted to bring up before we move on. We have Jordan Peele's fourth film coming early 2025. Was supposed to come out in 2024, pushed out to 2025. Doesn't have a title, doesn't have anything. Just a poster right now with a desiccated hand with a 4 showing 4 fingers. And in my review of Nope, if you've never heard that, do check it out. I think that was an interesting episode here on the podcast, available in our feed. I mentioned that there was a real correlation between Jordan Peele and M. Night Shyamalan, and I continue to look at the parallels in their career. The first film, The Sixth Sense versus Get Out, a generational film, one of the few horror films that come every decade or so that are the cultural conversation. They're not just big hit movies. They don't just make money. They become a cultural moment for the years to come. And that happened for The Sixth Sense, and it happened for Get Out. So the curse of that huge success. Second film, Unbreakable for M. Night, for Jordan Peele. Follow-up film is Us. Now, Us is as financially successful as Get Out because there was so much anticipation for this, but audiences were disappointed. Unbreakable, nowhere near as successful as The Sixth Sense, but again, this disappointment from audiences, but then in both cases, films that in retrospect, out of that anticipated context, are considered one of their very best films. Of course, Jordan Peele, at this case, only has 2 films to compare, but there are some interesting parallels there. The hype, the anticipation, and the muted reaction from the public, at least. And then the third film, an alien invasion film, in both cases. So now I do wonder what's going to happen when we have a fourth film, if we're going to correlate it to M. Night's career. This is The Village. This is when the critics and the culture at large starts to laugh openly at M. Night. Of course, M. Night courted this to a large extent by making that weird mockumentary. Jordan Peele seems very down to earth in all of his interactions, and he is constantly propping up other filmmakers like Oz Perkins, for example, Longlegs. He's producing his next movie. So it doesn't seem to be a personality thing, but it is still interesting that in both regards to both of these filmmakers, they are constantly having a conversation. And Tarantino does this too, by the way. So you can be successful in this vein where the pressure of their own persona, the pressure of their own mythology is baked into each one of these projects. And I think that it can be harmful sometimes. Last point with the Jordan Peele correlation that I want to call out here is that as I was watching the movie last night, I was thinking, man, Jordan Peele and M. Night need to work together. Not work together. They need to do what Tarantino and P.T. Anderson do, where they share their scripts in progress with each other and go back and forth and give feedback on the scripts. And here's the reason why. M. Night's got ideas. He's got concepts. And we're going to get into the spoilers now in just a few minutes. But he needs to put some more meat on these bones. Just hinting at a theme, just having one scene that is an emotional culmination thematically to the film is not enough. You need to build up to that. And on the other hand, you have Jordan Peele, where his films also have big hooks and are fun, literally just joyously fun, surprising, and exciting to watch in theaters, at least through those first 3, obviously. But simultaneously, they are so overloaded. He is so overanalyzing the material and putting so many layers of reads onto it, which I love, by the way. And film critics obviously love to have multiple reads on what Nope represents, and also that it's winking at blockbusters at the past, like Close Encounters and Jaws. So they love all the film history in there. They love some of the techniques that are being used. They love the use of music. They love the comedy that's baked in. And they love the thematics that are, the ownership of image and how that's been taken away from the African-American population in this country since the birth of film, basically. Just some of the themes that are in Nope. And it's so overbaked. It's so overly thought out. So I think that two of these together, these two filmmakers together, would be good for each other, because Peele would be like, man, that scene there in Trap and that scene there, great, but you need to cut out like 50% of this, and you need to like connect those themes somehow, and you need to work on that. And he would prop up this very thin, thematically film like Trap, for example. And alternately, you could take the 7 or 8 sociological reads on each one of Peele's films and be like, let's peel that back like to 2 or 3 and save some of that, thematics for another film. So they could balance each other out, basically. All right, finally, here we go. We're getting to the spoilers of Trap. So the inspiration for the film itself, Shyamalan has described it as Silence of the Lambs being set at the Eras tour, the Taylor Swift tour. And he had also seen his daughter in concert. And as he was writing the script, he started to integrate her into the plot. The songs, by the way, if you listen to them, the lyrics, which Celia wrote for the film, are referencing the internal turmoil within the characters or directly referencing plot points within the film. This is a little bit of a corny technique, but it is also something that happens in Bollywood films. So there is, maybe I'm being, or maybe I was being overly critical in my analysis in how they don't cut away from a lot of the music and how it's continuously running throughout the whole entire film, or at least the first half or a little more than half of it. So maybe there's more intentionality there to use the music to give some interiority to the characters. I don't think it works that well. It's a little too on the nose, but I do see what they're going for. And it does work sometimes, to be honest. The setup, as I mentioned, they end up at this Tanaka Arena, I think it is. By the way, even though the film is supposedly in Philadelphia, this was shot in Canada, in Ontario, at an abandoned arena that I think was being renovated. So this is not in Philadelphia. Didn't shoot there, although in the plot of the film, yes, this is Philadelphia. I guess they needed to. I didn't even think about it until I read that factoid. But you do need to basically be inside of this arena for months, right? There's so much of this film that is shot within there. So you do need to have full access for quite some period of time. And that would be almost impossible at some active arena. So that all makes sense. And they probably got it at a budget if they go to some semi-abandoned location. This father and daughter end up at this arena. They're going to see Lady Raven, this fictional pop star. And she only sings trap music. No, I'm just kidding. That would be actually an interesting decision. And we see a very large police presence. We see that Josh Hartnett, his character Cooper, is very intrigued by this, or wary of it, definitely. And outside of his purview, we see more and more police showing up. Probably 15 minutes, 20 minutes into the film, he takes a break from his daughter. He says he needs to run to the bathroom. And while he's in the bathroom, he actually has an app installed on his phone with a camera, and you see that he has somebody trapped somewhere. Another trap. Oh, we've discovered over the course of time that his daughter is having a fight with one of the girls in her class, and the mom and that daughter are here at the concert. He runs into the mom, who's a very pushy, identifiable character. We probably all have, I mean, it's a little chilly. I know someone who looks like this that reminds me of this character in a lot of ways, in her performance as well, in real life. But this overly enthusiastic, a Karen, basically the stereotype of a Karen. And interestingly, throughout this early part of the film, we are always empathizing with someone that we know is a killer. And not just, no, he took somebody's money, or he raged out and bonked somebody on the head. He apparently is viciously butchering people. So he has some compulsion to dismember people. Oh, I forgot to mention, in the opening credits, there is actually pretty clever, but doesn't pay off later on. I was actually hoping it would, that we see the credits are just implied that it is a torso we're seeing, and that it's being cut up like you see those diagrams of the cuts of meat on a bull. And of course, the butcher, that correlation. And then the names in the credits have pieces of them missing. So once again, very grisly joke to put into the credits themselves, but fun in it of itself. And it doesn't even call attention to itself. It's just doing it in a very subtle way. So I did appreciate that. Very stark black and white credits. But we are very much sympathetic to this supposedly brutal murderer. We all can empathize with going to a concert or going somewhere with our daughters and having to smile and grin and, yes, I'm having a great time, honey. And then the encounter with the mother of the bullying girl. So our sympathies are very much with this killer. Cooper goes and befriends, and we see this in the trailer, one of the workers at the arena, who tells him, I'm not supposed to tell anybody, but he tells him, uses that facade of the doting dad to get him to explain, well, what's going on right now? And this is when he lays it all out. This is a trap that's being set. They know he's going to be here. It's a little questionable that they know he's going to be there, but we'll get to that. And this is the butcher. Have you heard about the butcher? And he tries a few different escapes here. Initially, he knocks some girl down the stairs. Once again, just straining credibility here. We see that they have put cameras everywhere and that any kind of suspicious behavior is going to be identified. So he is being really suspicious. Anybody who looks at the video footage of this girl getting knocked down the stairs, and by the way, anybody of the dozens of people who were standing around her would see that it was him. And later on, when he's able to change his costume and when he's able to rig up an explosion in a fryer, go through access doors he's not supposed to go to, this guy's behaving in exactly the way that this profiler, another character I haven't brought up yet, but there's a profiler that we see too, played by Haley Mills, the child actress, Haley Mills, who is in their ears explaining this is the psychology of this character. This is what he's going to try to do as he's doing it on screen, basically. And yet it doesn't raise any alarm bells. So once again, these cops, not great at their jobs. Maybe the most egregious moment here when he does this is when he wanders in, he's stolen the access card from that friendly t-shirt salesman without murdering him and goes backstage to go get some coffee. I just got to grab some coffee, guys, in a room full of nothing but police officers. And the fact that he is never scrutinized. They are picking people out of the stands. We got to question this guy. We got to question that guy. And at no time are they questioning this guy who just randomly shows up in these places he's not supposed to be. Of course, if he's one of the employees, then that gives him some coverage. But still, you got to just say, I'm going to question everybody. Because what if he's pretending to be an employee? What if he bought a ticket and he also is an employee? You still got to question these people. Maybe they were pre-vetted. It doesn't matter. You got to double, triple, quadruple check. If you are pretty certain the guy's going to be there and they are taking this seriously, they have basically every police officer in Philadelphia is there, then you got to question this guy. That's just me nitpicking. I mean, these type of movies, you got to have huge gaping holes. Unless you are Silence of the Lambs, check out my re-review of Silence of the Lambs, because that movie is pretty tight. That's a tight script. By the way, the whole interactions between this woman with Cooper, he keeps running into her, and the daughter, and all of that, I am pretty sure there is a cut of this film when Cooper kills this woman. I'm pretty sure there is, because there's just too much going on here that is not explored further. And if I'm right about that, it's interesting that it's not here, because once again, I think they're trying to make us sympathize with this guy, which is pretty strange, right? We get to hear that he's this horrible, brutal killer, but we never get to see it. So it allows us to sympathize with him. And that is pretty interesting, that the film is making us sympathetic to him in many ways. I'll get into some of the other ways it does as well, even seeing him as a victim in some ways. So it's an interesting choice, to say the least. He steals a police radio at some point, so he's listening in on their investigation. This profiler who's feeding them information, what to look for. They somehow know that he has a tattoo on his wrist. That is not explained. I mean, I can't imagine how that possibly they have that detail. He does do some clever things here. I don't know how nobody notices that the oil is boiling in the deep fryer for that long. I do like when he sneaks up onto the roof and then he has taken off his jacket and stupidly left the card he needs in the jacket, only to realize that the apron that he's stolen has someone's wallet in it. And of course, luckily, there's the card as well. So there's these near escapes. This is all fun stuff. Once again, interesting that the actual suspense is coming from our alignment with the killer. Pretty weird. And that flips. So that's an interesting design to the story. Early on, we hear that there's only one way that anyone gets in and out without being thoroughly screened again, and that's through backstage. So as soon as you hear that, you know, well, that's going to pay off later. And of course, turns out that somebody in the audience is going to get pulled up on stage to sing or dance, I should say, with Lady Raven. So of course, Cooper finagles this, running into her quote unquote uncle, who's played by M. Night Shyamalan, of course, always has to be in his own films. He makes up some story. She had cancer. Don't bring it up. It's very sensitive for her, of course, conveniently. And of course, he gets her backstage. It all works out perfectly. This seriously pisses off her bully friend in the crowd, which we witness. Oh, I forgot to bring up the fact that Cooper is haunted by this old woman, and that the profiler, who's also an older woman, sends him into panic, basically. And we know M. Night is afraid of old people. That's a theme in all of his films, or almost all of them. So once again, I'm not sure there might be a Freudian read on this film. And some of that is actually interesting. There is a tension in the film where I thought that they were going to be able to pay that off in a better way than they did. But once again, maybe hints at a deeper film around the same material. To this point, the concert's ending. He has successfully gotten backstage. Very funny Kid Cudi, for me anyway, very funny Kid Cudi cameo. And at this point, we're more than halfway through the film. It looks like he's about to make his escape. And in my mind, I'm like, well, these idiots have just given a clear path to him out the back door. None of these people get scrutinized. He's finagled to have her even drive them out of the place. So it looks like he's going to, hey, I'm going to just exit through the back door. Thank you so much for everything. But then this personal assistant to Lady Raven, mentioned the fact that you see those like 20 guys down there. Hey, we just have to do a little extra scrutiny, a little extra talking now. We just have to get a secondary interview on the way out, and then we'll be on our way. And of course, this is when he knows that there's no way out. He's basically requested, explicitly bent over backwards to set up this circumstance. And this is when he's finally truly trapped. Oh, we also see here, like really thrown in out of nowhere, that it's not only that this was an arbitrary event that Lady Raven wasn't even aware about this whole sting operation. She's deeply vested in it. She's talking to the profiler. She has apparently spoken to the profiler about this. So good for her for preparing, I guess, for the night. And we see them speaking here. And this is when Cooper takes her aside and says, oh, can I talk to you one-on-one? I got to ask you a couple questions. I don't want to talk in front of my daughter. And this is when the story takes one of its this is how it goes for the rest of the film. A dumb decision, and then, oh, well, that's clever, and then a dumb decision, and well, that's clever. The dumb decision is that, to write at this moment, that the way he's going to get out of this is to show her a video and saying, this guy's going to die of carbon monoxide poisoning. He's a firefighter, so he knows about carbon monoxide. I've put one in this room. You see it right back there. That guy in this video, I'm the butcher. I'm the guy you're looking for. And this guy is going to die unless you do exactly what I say. You are going to escort us out the back, say we're clear to go. We're not going to be questioned. The cops, by the way, are just going to take her word for it. They're not going to be like, hold on a second. Maybe she's under duress. Maybe something's going on. Maybe they would have a phrase that you could say in the same way that they have phrases for whether you're allowed to be in a part of the arena or not. Maybe they'd have a phrase where at any time, if you encounter the killer, because they literally say this, one of you right now speaking to the killer. Maybe there was a ripcord you can pull to say just a word that would alert them that this is going to happen. I'm pretty sure that there would be a safe word that they could call out, but that doesn't happen. Instead, she decides, and by the way, she doesn't decide, well, I'm going to let this guy escape because even if that guy dies, even if this guy's not bluffing, at least that's one more death instead of dozens more. This is what's going through my mind at the moment. And she says, okay, I'll do that. No problem. Let me escort you out of the building. And I'm like, okay, this is a dumb plot point. And it did turn me off here, but it does set up an incredible turn here. He says, hey, why don't you just drop me off at the next block? We're parked right down the street. Thanks so much for all your help. We loved your concert. Now, what's crazy about this is that now, again, she could let him exit the car. He just wants to get out of the car. As soon as he gets out of the car, she could just follow him, be on the phone or on the radio with the cops and say, I am in pursuit of the killer right now. He's parked in this parking lot. He's with his daughter. This is the color of his car. Or if they're on foot because he doesn't want to get into his car, then of course that exacerbates things right there. So once again, she could have stopped things inside of the facility. She could have stopped things at that moment. The only reason she doesn't do it is because she doesn't want that kid that's trapped to die, even though who knows if that video is even a live video. Maybe the whole thing is a scam. But she takes him at his word for whatever reason. And she does turn the tables here by saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to drive you all the way home. And of course, the girl immediately, his daughter immediately picks up the phone, calls the mom, as she would do, and she has turned the tables on him a bit. And this is when we get to the part of the film that I said is kind of spoiled by the trailer, because you wouldn't have seen that there was going to be another whole section of the film outside of the arena, if you hadn't seen it in the trailer. Maybe there was a decision that people were turned off in the first trailer when they thought, well, nothing else is going to happen here. But no, we're only in the arena for about half the time, a little more than half. And they show up at Cooper's house. And once again, I don't understand how she has not sent an SOS on her text, even to her driver. I don't know why. She hasn't done a lot of this. She just walks into the house. He keeps threatening, if you do anything, if you call the cops, if anything happens, if the cops show up, that kid is dead. Okay, fine. But how does she walk into that house? And what does she think she's going to accomplish there? She's walking into another trap. So this is kind of interesting that the movie is moved from one trap to another. And this is tense as the scene plays out. This is where there's a hint here of a more interesting film. You can imagine another scenario where this is the trap, where somebody is now in a circumstance where they know they're in danger. They're trying to protect the people in the house and get them out of there. And how do they do it with warning them without playing their card too much? In a way, she would need to be naive to what's happening here for this tension to be even stronger, potentially. That's not the film we get. This is just a simpler version of that same dynamic. But these scenes are tense, by the way. They are definitely tense. And honestly, it's just because I don't know what's going to happen next. And another thing I'll compliment this film for is that in modern horror films, oftentimes they will ignore cell phones because it's like, there's no radio signal here. I dropped it when I was running. It got smashed. Oftentimes we have to remove the cell phone from the circumstance to move the plot along. And what I'll say is this film is the opposite. Everything is so technological. Everything is so cell phone based. We have Josh Hartnett saying, you can't say anything right now because I can remotely kill this guy on my cell phone. Second cool thing that happens with the phone is when she invites the daughter, Riley, I think her name is, to sit by her and play at the piano together. Just one more song before she leaves, because he's definitely trying to get her out of the house. And honestly, you have to assume that there's a real chance that he's trying to kill his family off here. So they may be in danger as well. Like the movie The Stepfather. Better to kill them off than let them know his true identity. And she steals Riley's phone. Importantly, because she says, hey, let's take a selfie. Riley can't find her phone. So of course she grabs Dad's phone. Let's just take a couple of photos. And then she jumps into the bathroom. She now has 3 phones, by the way. She has her phone, she has Cooper's phone, and she has the daughter's phone. She goes onto the app. She starts asking, I'm not sure why there's two-way communication on this murder app. I guess it's, I guess it's just like a nanny cam or something. So I guess the technology is not as nefarious, despite the logo for this thing. It's not just for serial killers anymore. So they have two-way communication. She starts speaking to this trapped guy. He has enough information, pretty slight, but hey, what if you could have millions of detectives all looking at the same time? So now she pops out her phone and she goes onto Instagram Live and she reaches out to all of her fans and says, hey, anyone in this area near Philadelphia, outside New Jersey, does any of this sound familiar? And she stays on the phone. By the way, Cooper is freaking out, trying to kick down the door. Of course, that would make too much of a show, would panic his family. So he doesn't kick down the door, though that probably was the right choice given how things turn out. And she stays on the phone until somebody, one of her fans, says, I'm on my way. My uncle's with me. We're heading to the house. We're going to go check it out. And when the door opens here, finally, Hartnett gives a really good performance. You just see him trying to keep things together. This controlling monster that's so used to keeping everything so well defined. And it's as if we see him in a really imposing light for the first time. This is very well done, I think, by his performance and the way he's photographed. By the time he looks at the app again, this happened very quickly, by the way, the victim has been released, has been rescued, and he decides the jig is up, and he's going to take Lady Raven as a hostage, probably for leverage later. And here's where we realize that Lady Raven has done her homework. And like I said, there's a lot of acting required here on her part. Surprisingly, that she would become so central to the plot here, even beyond the being on stage. She's been coached by this profiler that he probably had a domineering mother, and she starts to play the part of the mom and simultaneously reach out to this compassionate side of him potentially. Not sure how this profiler knows that. Well, maybe he knows he has a family now. He's a family man now. So there is a paternal side of him as well. And Hartnett plays this pretty well. He is both acknowledging the fact that you are messing with me, get out of my head, I know what you're trying to do, but it is still throwing him off a little bit. And this is actually a pretty effective scene, especially on his part. And then we think, well, here it is. The movie must be coming to an end. And the only reason I think that, by the way, he lets her go. She's with the family now. He walks back into the house and closes the garage door. The family obviously is freaking out about the circumstance. And the dumbest cops in the world, again, are surrounding the house. They can see him through the windows. He's washing the dishes. His OCD's kicking in. And it really does feel like, well, this is where it's going to end. Even though I knew right away, I'm like, well, he's going to blow up the house or he's got some other escape. Speaking of that Silence of the Lambs reference, here's at least one place where they're trying to make this connection to Silence of the Lambs with this escape. They don't pull off the brilliant escape sequence from Silence of the Lambs, obviously, something they should have tried to emulate more, I think. Not in its details, but in its effect. And for whatever reason, they take a really long time to get into the house. They say, hey, get the family out of here. They don't even have 2 SWAT members in the car. They only have 1. And of course, it's Josh Hartnett. It's Cooper, who has escaped from the house because I thought there might be some kind of distraction in the house. He actually just turned out to have a tunnel that he had that connected him out. He had taken out one of the SWAT team members and, of course, jumped into the car with Lady Raven. She's handcuffed, but escapes using her fame again. She's able to just barely reach the windows, and they're at an intersection. People recognize her. This is how popular this is how famous she is. She'd be like Taylor Swift or something in this universe. That no matter where she is, people recognize her immediately. In defense of the film, the SWAT team's not that incompetent that they completely lost it. They immediately know where he is. He's escaped with her, and they show up at the scene just minutes later. But he, of course, has escaped with the Lady Raven paraphernalia. He's changed into a cap and a hoodie and left his SWAT armor behind. They think he's inside the car, but he's escaped again. Again, incompetent policing here. I mean, honestly, there's absolutely no reason he should have escaped these 10 times already at this point. They are within feet of him, and they cannot catch him. And then we get to a really interesting scene. I guess this is probably the last 10 or 15 minutes of the film, which initially looks like an incredibly stupid scene. There's this convenient talk between the psychologist and the wife. She's going back to the house. The kids have been taken away conveniently, but intelligently. They say, you sure you don't want us to put you into a safe house? She says to the psychiatrist, no, I just need to be alone. And at first I'm thinking, this is going to be the dumbest mistake she makes. And of course, seeing the trailer, I know that this scene is coming. A spoiler from the trailer. B, it's going to be some crazy twist. They did it together. She knew the whole time. This is Alison Pill, by the way, which I didn't mention in my mini review, giving a really good performance here at the end. And this is a really good scene. This is where the film hints at a more interesting version of this story. He feels betrayed by her. It turns out she was suspicious of him. I do wonder about all those women out there, wives who watch too much Dateline, that are going to now take any suspicion they have about their husband and immediately think, aha, he's the butcher, or some version of it. And they lay it all out. I was suspicious of you. There was something wrong with you. You lied too easily. I saw it multiple times. I thought you might be cheating. And this back and forth is really good. Alison Pill giving a great performance. And there are parts, like I said, there's Josh Hartnett leans into this certain version of his performance, which is a little too repetitive. There's the same kind of dead eyes with the grin that you see in the trailer that gets used over and over again. Not only obviously it's the director's choice and the editor's choice, so it's not just him doing that. But this is where he's at his best. When you see the mask is slipping, you see that he's losing control, or he thinks he's still in control or wants to be, and understanding that the end is nigh, basically. And his betrayal he feels from his wife, even though he's a mass murderer. And he basically announces that this is going to be a murder-suicide and that he's most angry at her because he will not be able to see the children again, which speaks to the "you're not all bad" theme of the film. This is a really weird thing. She gets him to eat a piece of pie, which, I mean, you don't eat anything that this person is going to give you. Just my 2 cents. I saw this coming a mile away. She's poisoned him. He's either on death's door or at least highly intoxicated, and yet somehow gets tasered multiple times and all of a sudden has superhuman strength and almost kills one of the officers who tasers him. But when he's intoxicated, by the way, there's this actually very cool effect, once again, hinting at what could have been a more interesting film, where he sees this ghostly vision of his mom again, telling him, you're not all bad, you can be saved. And he's saying, no, I can't be. And just these hints of this trauma he must have suffered when he was younger. And of course, this is another trap. There's the theme again, that he now thinks that he's in the clear. Oh, I forgot to mention, of course, that in this excellent exchange with Alison Pill, that it turns out that she, in a way, trapped him. She followed him to this place. It wasn't a place where he held people up. This is actually an interesting detail. It's not a place where he was torturing and dismembering these people. It was just a place where he sat and he calmed himself and he planned. And just that aspect of his personality troubled her so much that she says, well, maybe it's him. And she left a clue. She's the one who left the ticket, which was the clue that triggered this whole entire thing, because she thought either it's him and they'll catch him and I won't feel guilty for not having done anything, or it's not. And then I'll know that it's not him. And of course, he sussed this out as well when he found out over listening in on these police radios. Another dumb thing in the plot, by the way, that do not be talking on the open bandwidth or during the training sessions or wherever this information leaked about all these details of the investigation. You only need the amount of information you need to know. And that's going to be that this is the age range of this guy. He's going to be at this place. He may be trying to imitate an employee or somebody else while he's there. That's it. Focus on those things. Don't worry about all these other things. So it's convoluted, to say the least, that any of that information would leak out. But it is the thing that clued him into the fact that his wife was the one that probably gave him up. Anyway, he gets tasered, finally arrested. He's in full shackles, and they're about to put him into an armored vehicle when he sees his daughter's bicycle knocked over. Please, just let me fix this one thing, which of course we're supposed to think it's his OCD, but I immediately knew what was going on here. Look, in Silence of the Lambs, and M. Night's making this correlation himself openly when he's talking about this film, Hannibal Lecter's not allowed to get a pen. This guy murders with a pen. Hannibal Lecter could have killed an army of people with the spokes on a bicycle. You do not let Hannibal Lecter next to the bicycle. And you don't let this guy next to the bicycle either. He just takes one spoke. But of course, that's enough for him to release himself from his handcuffs. And that's where we leave things. He's in the back of that armored vehicle. He's being transported to who knows where for processing. He has freed himself from his shackles. He's there by himself, by the way. No one else in the back with him, of course, conveniently. There's no cameras back there either, surveilling him either. So is he going to spring out and escape once again? Are there going to be 15 cops and he's going to be able to take them all out? Who knows? It's all pretty silly, but I had a lot of fun with it in no small measure for its very silliness. All right, a couple things here at the end that I want to call out. Oh, of course, there's a bonus scene, by the way, in the credits. If you missed it, there's a bonus scene where that t-shirt salesman freaks out when he discovers on the news that he had helped Cooper. He's like, I helped that guy. Speaking of the connection to Jordan Peele, he's obviously trying to get some of that finale of Get Out humor in there with Lil Rel, much more effective in that film. So any question that this is supposed to be comedic, obviously we have it answered here to a large extent in that final moment. But I want to call out a couple of things. As I was watching the film, when I saw the Haley Mills character show up, the psychiatrist, at first I thought, wait a second, is she possibly the psychiatrist from Split, Glass, or some correlation? I needed to double check that when I left the theater, because in its tone, this film could very well exist in the universe of Split. And I honestly think the reason that we have this potential redemption arc, that this serial killer can be redeemed, they're still good in you, that I think he wants, M. Night that is, wants to turn this into a recurring character in other films. I predict that if this film is a hit, and I don't know if it's going to be big enough to warrant this, but if it is a hit, I predict that we will see this character extended in the mythology of the M. Night films, because this could very well be, he's very strong. I actually thought at one point in the film, he says that he has a sense, he has an urge, a need to kill. And I thought about the Bruce Willis character in Unbreakable and how he touches somebody and then he can see that they're evil. So could you imagine that somehow this character becomes like a Dexter character where he can use that power not to kill good people, but to kill bad people? And there was even a second where I'm like, well, maybe he is killing bad people and he's actually one of these superhumans, a superhero maybe even, that we saw in those other films. But then when he explained that he had the urge to kill Lady Raven because she's someone who had this aura, this sense of being complete, and that he's a butcher, he cuts people up to tell them that they're not complete because of, theoretically, if we're going to psychoanalyze this legitimately, that he has this missing piece himself, and he wants to remind everybody else that they also do. This does not sound like the power of a superhero, but the pathology of a supervillain, or maybe just a run-of-the-mill villain. But maybe they can turn this power around, or maybe there'll be some other character that can change his behavior in the future. I do think M. Night, if this film makes money, is going to want to extend this universe or even intersect it with the split glass Unbreakable universe. All right, as I'm writing this, it's too early to know how this film is going to perform at the box office. I like to make box office predictions. I feel if audiences connect with this, this could be a $30 million opening weekend, and this could make $70 or $80 million. If people reject it, if they laugh at the inclusion of his daughter, M. Night's daughter, in the film, for example, it could only end up making $50 or $60 million, maybe $100 million worldwide, which is still a hit for a film of this scale. But I don't know if it would be an extended universe style hit, but we'll see. Does it perform like The Visit, or does it perform like Split? Or does it split the difference? By the time you listen to this, some box office numbers should be rolling in. If I'm going to give this film any kind of earnest read, I do think, is this about the way that being a parent changes our relationship to ourselves, that selfishness, that focus on our own internal dramas and drives is subverted by being a parent? I mean, I think that's actually true. So it's an interesting metaphor to put in place here. Is M. Night making some kind of commentary on himself, this OCD controlling director, and how he needs to code switch when he is directing versus parenting? He does not have a reputation, by the way, of being an abusive and controlling director. I think most people who work with him actually say he's very nice to work with. So maybe he's just being self-critical there. But he wouldn't be the first filmmaker, whether it be Hitchcock or in the movie Peeping Tom or Lars von Trier, for example, to make a film in which the director surrogate who torments people for his own viewing pleasure. I just saw Old recently, for example, and we literally have a scene where M. Night is watching the people age and die on the beach in these terrible ways from a distance via camera. So this would not be the first time that a filmmaker, even this filmmaker, has used the connection between a killer and the director who is puppeting these people for his own sadistic enjoyment and ours as an audience. So maybe M. Night's being a little self-critical, self-reflection, or maybe it's just him winking at Rear Window or winking at Peeping Tom or winking at other films in which the director is correlated to a killer and exploring those themes, although very lightly here, I think. All right, mixed bag, a very silly film, entertaining. You can't take any of it seriously for a minute, which is unfortunate. I'd like to see him make something a little deeper, especially after Knock at the Cabin, which was definitely more earnest, despite its failings at the end. But once again, didn't make a lot of money. And if he wants to keep subsidizing these self-funded films, he needs to have hits. And this one's probably going to be a lot bigger. I guarantee it'll be bigger, maybe even a lot bigger than Knock at the Cabin. All right, that's the episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon.